A Cowboy's Love Song. Riverdale Ranch Romance Book Number 3. Written by Jewel Allen. Narrated by Melissa Connell and Scott Rose.
Chapter 1. Jeremy. "How much?" Jeremy Hawke asked his manager. "$20 grand, Sue Bitter said. Jeremy blinked and steepled his fingers. "Just to sing a song at Leroy Larkin's daughter's wedding?" Sue patted his knee, her multiple rings glinting in the sun. "Hun, this'll probably be the easiest 20 grand you're going to make. Plus, you get an excuse to visit home." This was the second time in recent months that Jeremy had been back to his hometown of Sunnyridge, Colorado. He'd performed a couple of songs at a fundraiser for Sylvia Garcia's mom in July. One big reason he'd said yes to that benefit was because Tammy Brown had asked him. This was before Sylvia and Jeremy's brother Joaquin had started dating more seriously. This one sounded more like a job, an overpaid job. "Tell me more about it," Jeremy said. Sue's eyes gleamed. "Leroy would like you to compose a special song for the couple." Jeremy froze. Composing, which had come easily to him in his struggling early years, now felt like torture. He felt unbearable pressure for his sophomore CD to do as well as his debut album. He was like a country singer stranded in the desert. The well had run dry. But he couldn't tell Sue that. Maybe if he didn't say anything, his creative slump would go away, like a bad cold. "Go ahead then," he said. "Yes, I'll do it." Sue's expression relaxed. "Perfect. This'll be good for you. Already there's some buzz from Kat Keller's people. Rumor has it if you write the duet, she may be interested." Jeremy issued a low whistle. "Kat Keller, mega country star?" "Yep." "Yes, I'll definitely do it." It was just as he'd feared. What used to take him an hour took a few excruciating weeks, but by gum, he composed a duet. Whether or not it was worth 20 grand was debatable. A month later in October, he traveled to Sunnyridge for the wedding. It felt good to be back. He watched the pasture and farmland whiz past as he drove his Jeep Rubicon. Aspen and other trees were turning to glorious fall colors on the mountains. Such a welcome contrast to all the concrete he'd been seeing lately while touring. He'd sorely missed this. At the entrance of the Larkin property, a long driveway led to pasture which stretched for miles in all directions from the gigantic 2-story lodge house. A blonde woman in a white pantsuit met him as he parked by the house and got out of his Jeep. "Taylor Morris," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm the assistant event planner. Thank you for coming to the rehearsal dinner." "Glad I can," Jeremy said. "I like practicing at least once in a venue." His band, who had traveled separately in their tour trailer, was already setting up their equipment. "The grass has been clipped to perfection," Taylor confided. "We added a few more horses to the pasture to add to the peaceful scenery." "Are you from around here, Taylor?" he asked. "Actually, no. Why?" She sounded like a city slicker. That was why. But he just shook his head. "Just curious." He glanced at the circular table stacked on the lawn. "Will a celebrity chef cater the event?" he asked, tongue-in-cheek. "Unfortunately, no, but Penny's Diner will." "Great," Jeremy said with genuine enthusiasm. "Love that place." Taylor looked past him and brightened. "Here comes the happy couple," she said. "My boss and her groom." "Your boss?" Jeremy repeated as they walked over to greet them. Taylor introduced the stunning redhead with amazing green eyes as Nellie Larkin, the bride. Nellie smiled. "I own the event company, but I'm letting Taylor handle my wedding's details." Jeremy shook the couple's hands. "Congratulations, guys. So happy for you." Nellie's fiancé Dax could hardly take his eyes off her, and Jeremy couldn't blame him. Jeremy remembered them from high school, though they hadn't run in the same circles. She'd been homecoming queen if he wasn't mistaken. "Watch the dog!" a chorus of voices said. On the grass at their feet, a basset hound raised his head and plopped it back down. Dax grinned. "Meet Bub, a ring bearer." Jeremy petted the dog's belly and smiled. He was sure this wedding would be interesting. Taylor continued with introductions. Do you also know Bram and his wife Stella? She pointed to a bearded man and a woman with long, wispy blonde hair. Jeremy confirmed with a nod and handshake that he knew them both. Wife, he echoed. For how long now? Bram kissed the top of Stella's head. A month, she said, blushing. Wow, Jeremy said. Congratulations, too. Taylor moved down the line. This is Bram's sister, Tammy. Jeremy's smile widened as he caught sight of the beautiful brunette. He liked Tammy a lot. At one time, he'd even thought about asking her out on a date, but he chickened out. When his debut album established him as a country superstar, he moved away from Sunnyridge and Tammy. She'd sure blossomed from high school. Her shiny brown hair fell in a sleek waterfall around her shoulders. Thick dark lashes framed her warm brown eyes. Best of all, her ring finger was bare. He'd hoped to talk to her at Sylvia's mom's fundraiser, but there'd been no chance before he had to travel back for a concert. Now he was glad he'd made the time to attend the rehearsal. Hi, Tammy, he said. Her cheeks turned an attractive pink. Hi, Jeremy, she said, before mumbling an excuse and walking hurriedly away. Jeremy scratched his head. Why was Tammy acting so odd? He wanted to go and talk to her. Maybe she was just busy? But Sue was descending upon him. The band is ready for you to do a mic check, she said. Was it just his imagination, but did her eyes narrow watching Tammy walk off? Do you know Tammy? He asked Sue, his eyes lingering Tammy's direction. I've seen her around, Sue said. She gave him a sidelong glance. Are you interested in her? Was he interested in her? Well, yes, but not anything serious. I mean, she's never seemed interested in me. Sue chortled, her former Army Ranger voice raspy as she choked out, Anyone who doesn't seem interested in you must be blind. Well, not everyone likes to be in a public relationship, in the spotlight. He walked across the lawn alongside Sue. Which is probably just as well, Sue said. Remember how we were going to set you up for a relationship with Kat? Jeremy froze. What relationship? Jeremy, you can't already have forgotten. At 30, you don't even have an excuse for forgetfulness. Remember when we were shooting The Breeze with Remy Records and Kat's agent was there? We practically betrothed you. Betrothed? Jeremy stared at Sue. I've seen these fairy tale movies, you know. You mean she and I are engaged? Sue whispered, Fine, in love. Don't worry, just for pretend. Jeremy wagged his finger. No ma'am. I'm willing to bend over backward for you, Sue, but that's a line I wouldn't cross. Even if it's a line that would lead to a 7-figure contract with Remy Records? 7 what? Yep, you heard it right. You know I wouldn't push things if I didn't think it would be good for your career. Jeremy studied the older woman's face. She hadn't changed much over the years, still crusty as ever, telling things as they were, fearless, precisely why he liked having her on his team. She didn't sugarcoat bad news, nor did she shield him from the fallout of his bad decisions. She gave it to him straight, but once he decided the course, she pretty much got out of his way. I don't know, Sue, he said, rubbing his scruff. Why is it a good idea for me to pretend to be in love with Kat? Because it's good for the ratings. The tabloids will devour it, and then you can break up. Jeremy thought of Tammy. He liked her a lot, but lately she'd been giving him vibes that she wasn't into him. Until they had a relationship going, did he really owe her his loyalty? Besides, this gig with Kat would only be temporary. Fine, he said, though he wasn't excited about it. Attaboy. I was thinking it would be fun if she could be your date tomorrow. My date? Here? Sure, why not? I'll invite the press and they'll make a heyday of it. Jeremy frowned. I doubt that the wedding couple will like that. They knew what they were signing up for when they invited you to sing. They can hardly expect us to keep this event hush-hush. But to invite Paps? That's a little extreme. I'd just as soon have them there from the get-go than having them get it from hearsay. Besides, the bride's dad is a shrewd businessman. I'm sure he won't mind the publicity. All right, Sue. Jeremy shook his head and winced. You win. Sue grinned. Perfect.
Chapter 2. Tammy. Poem by Tammy. Grilled ribs, hot and smoky, tantalizes her senses at a posh wedding reception, like the cowboy she loves. Tammy had avoided Jeremy all afternoon until sundown. He was busy anyway, setting up with his band. What was wrong with her? With other people, she was her usual loud, outgoing self. But Jeremy Hawke left her tongue-tied. Ever since he became a celebrity, she just couldn't feel comfortable around him. But tonight, maybe she would gather the nerve to talk to him, maybe even flirt with him. The thought made her feel woozy. You got this, Tammy. You've done harder things. Oh yeah? Like what? Like that time your junior year when you agreed to go to the dance with Alex Grimm? That wasn't so hard. He needed a date. Big deal. He also had bad acne and his hands sweated that whole time during practice. But I didn't know until practice that his hand would sweat. He had acne all right, but he had pretty eyes. Since when did you become Mother Tammy, the martyr nun? Since Alex Grimm. Ha! A voice broke into her thoughts. Tammy's head turned so fast, she got whiplash. Jeremy had been standing behind her. Hey, she said, pushing back a strand of hair from her face. Her hands sweated as badly as Alex Grimm's did. What are you doing? Jeremy asked. Talking to myself, she joked. Isn't it obvious? He smiled a slow smile that made her heart skip a beat. And that scruff. I was wondering if you have plans for dinner, he said. Me? Yes. Who else did I mean? The corners of his eyes crinkled with amusement. I think they had plans for a barbecue here tonight. She thought of the ribs, hot and smoky, like Jeremy's eyes. I would love to spring for a nice dinner away from here, he said. Just the two of us. Just the two of us? Oh, well, Tammy gulped. Okay. Okay? He beamed. You mean yes? I think that's what okay means. I don't know. Sometimes it's so hard to know. What? What you're thinking? Her breath caught in her throat. He was looking at her in a way that she'd always dreamed about, as though he was interested in her. But how could he be? He was legions of miles away from her, a star in the heavens. I don't think you'd want to know what I'm thinking, she blushed. She bit her lip. Now it was his turn. What? Mischief lurked in his gaze. Nothing. She pointed over his shoulder. Oh, look! How pretty! His gaze followed her gesture. They were stringing up lights across the dance floor. It all looked magical. He turned back to her. What do you think about Tammy Brown? His eyes, his voice were persistent. She could be honest, she supposed. Sometimes I still can't believe that I'm talking to Jeremy Hawke, country superstar. He winced. Jeremy Hawke is just Jeremy in my book. I think ever since I heard you at that poetry night, I've been in awe of you. I remember that. He gazed into her eyes. I saw you in the audience. You remember that far back? Of course, I always remember girls who were cute. Tammy pursed her lips. Ah, I am honored to join the legion of cute girls you notice. No, he said, shaking his head. I don't mean that. I don't notice a lot of girls, just some girls. He smiled wryly. I think I'm digging myself a deeper hole. Tammy rolled her eyes and nodded. Somewhere nearby, Taylor shouted, Can I please have 4 guys help me move this prop? Jeremy made a move to help, but 4 guys already sprung to Taylor's rescue. Anyway, Jeremy said, his eyes twinkling, you want to hop on in my truck before we get roped into something else? The honky-tonk bar was packed to the rafters. Any hope of going incognito was squashed by Jerry Walsh, the bar owner, who whooped, Let's all welcome country superstar Jeremy Hawke! Everyone craned their neck to see who the superstar was eating with. Tammy wanted to disappear into the linoleum, although on second thought, looking at how disgusting the floor was, never mind. Hello, everyone, Jeremy said, waving. Tammy made a beeline for a booth in the back. Girls who used to diss her in high school now smiled at her, all friendly-like. Ronnie, a restaurant server, approached the table with her pad. Hi there, Tammy. I didn't know you knew each other. Well, yes, Tammy said. He went to high school here, you know. Ronnie turned her green eyes to Jeremy. I'm a big fan. Aren't we all? Tammy muttered to herself. She opened her menu, hoping Ronnie would get the hint. Are you here for a concert, Jeremy? Ronnie persisted. Jeremy flashed a patient smile. I'm singing at a wedding. Holy sagebrush. No kidding. Whose wedding? Nellie Larkin's. Ronnie rolled her eyes. Figures. With her pa's money, that wedding must cost a mint. We'll need a minute to look over the menu, Tammy said. Ronnie tucked her pad in her apron waistband. Okay, I'll be back. That's a promise. She gave Jeremy a meaningful glance. Tammy's eyes met Jeremy's, and they burst out laughing. I bet you can ask her for anything under the sun, and she'll deliver it to you, Tammy said from behind the menu. You think? He smirked. What about a beanless bean burrito? Ooh, that's just plain mean. He set down his menu and took a sip of his water. I'm easy. A burger and fries. My manager's not here to watch what I'm eating. She scrunched her nose. If I had a manager watching my diet, I wouldn't last a day. Sue lets me have cheat days. Tammy shrugged. I can't see giving someone that kind of power over me. It's not always fun, but in the end, Sue usually turns out to be right. I guess since you're so successful, Tammy said, she must be doing something right. I guess. Did she detect a hint of hesitation in his voice? Ronnie came back for their order. This time she wasn't as fangirl-like, sounding harried, and left them blessedly alone. Tammy realized that now she had to make conversation. Luckily, Jeremy seemed to be feeling chatty. So, Jeremy said, Tammy Brown, tell me all about yourself. His invitation made her feel all self-conscious. Oh, you know, I have 2 brothers, Bram and Gabe. I know all about that. I mean, tell me about what makes you happy. Oh, Tammy teased. Deep, are we? Might as well cut to the chase, he sassed back. She sat back and thought for a minute. Promise you won't laugh? I promise. He traced a cross on his muscular chest. Tammy tried to not stare. I love to write poetry, she admitted. His eyes burned into hers, like finding a kindred soul. Me too. Time stood still. She couldn't look away. Why was it that every time she gazed into his eyes, she couldn't breathe? We all know that, she said lightly, finally breaking eye contact. Some singers don't always write their songs, he pointed out, but you do. I do. He hesitated. Did. She gaped at him. Past tense? Seconds ticked as he swirled the ice cubes in his water. I'm having the worst writer's block. Huh, she blinked. Jeremy the poet? Seriously? He nodded, his head dipping lower, like he was embarrassed. I can't write a song to save my life. After the success of my first album, I think the pressure was just too much. His head whipped up, panic flitting across his face. It's our secret, okay? I haven't told my manager yet. The thought of the 2 of them sharing a secret was delicious and felt like a huge responsibility to keep. Sure, she assured him. I won't tell. She leaned forward and whispered. Why don't you want her to know? Maybe by not telling her or anyone else, I can pretend it's not there, he sighed. Unfortunately, it always is, in the back of my mind. I hate having to be creative under deadline. Yeah, that'll stifle it all right. When I try too hard, that's when the words freeze up. His eyes gleamed. Hey, what if you and I buddy it up and write songs together? Tammy raised her head and gaped at him. Real songs? He had this cute way of raising one corner of his mouth in a mischievous smile. Yep. That you might sing someday? He nodded. She swallowed. I don't know. Cocking his head, he studied her. What do you have to think about? Oh, you mean except for just everything about you? Well, for one, I've been applying for jobs, Tammy stammered, so I'll be working somewhere else, possibly. If you do get a job, Jeremy pointed out, we'll do it on your days off. And I don't know if you'll like my style, Tammy added, knowing she was grasping for straws. If your songs are as sassy as you, he said, smirking, I think co-writing will be fun. She blushed, cornered. His smile dialed back. What is it really, Tammy? She searched his eyes, seeing only kindness and a genuine curiosity. Taking a deep breath, she said, I'm scared that... She paused. She was scared of so many things, but she couldn't say that other thing that had her hyperventilating in his presence, that she had a crush on him and he would find out. How embarrassing. So instead, she shared part of the truth. I'm scared I'll let you down, she finally confided. Don't be. His hand covered hers, warm and reassuring, romantic and tingly. Just then, Ronnie walked up to their table with their order of burgers and fries. Jeremy pulled his hand back, and Tammy felt like she could breathe again. When Ronnie left them, Jeremy's eyes glimmered. Tell you what, we won't call it songwriting sessions, though it'll involve some of that. We'll spend time around Sunnyridge, going to our old haunts, down memory lane. Not dating, right? She said in a hurry, and then wished she could take her words back. Would dating Jeremy be so bad? She'd even get to write songs. But just the same, she said, because we're just friends. His expression was neutral, hard to read. Of course. She was still turning his proposal over in her mind when he said, I'll pay you. Tammy stiffened. Really, Jeremy? Sorry, he winced. Is that bad? She bristled. You'll pay me to show you around? Do you really think I'm that money grubbing? It's just fair, he said. I'll talk to my manager and have her figure out a fair fee, he added, if that's okay with you. Allowing herself to think of necessities Jeremy's money could buy until she got a real job, she blew out a breath. Fine. The topic of writing songs didn't come up during dinner, which was a huge relief to Tammy. She had felt all woozy just thinking of the possibility of working on songs with Jeremy. Over their burger and fries, they talked like old friends, with Tammy telling him stories from her job. Jeremy shared funny things that had happened on the road. Tammy was having so much fun, she was surprised to see that 2 hours had passed. A phone beeped. Jeremy tapped his shirt pocket and fished out his cell phone, studying the screen. Do you mind if I take this call? It's Sue, my manager. Of course, she said, though she was a little disappointed. Such was the life of a celebrity. What's up? He said into the phone. I'm having dinner with a friend. His voice tightened. Yes, it so happens to be Tammy. Tammy, who couldn't help but eavesdrop, was confused. Sue know about her? And why would Jeremy have to be on the defense about it? He listened for a minute, then said, I'll catch you later, Sue. As he ended the call, his face wore a rankled expression. Something wrong? She asked. No. The word came out in a rush, even as he continued to frown. Right, very believable. To the side, Ronnie was spraying tables with antiseptic and putting up chairs. Must be time to go, Tammy said. Must be. He sounded distracted. Disappointment pooled in her chest. The phone call with his manager filled her with self-doubt. Did Sue not like the idea of Jeremy hanging out with a nobody? Jeremy insisted on paying, even though Tammy was perfectly capable and willing. He opened the door for her, and they went out into the cool Colorado evening. Over the Rocky Mountains, the moon rose prettily, just for them. Dream on, Tammy. After Jeremy helped her in the passenger side of his Rubicon and got in his, he turned to her. Where would you like to go now? His voice was hushed. It seemed, for the moment, the phone call with his agent had been set aside. She would play along. She didn't want to leave his truck, to be honest, but she had to keep a semblance of wits about her. We could go to my place for ice cream. Wait, did she just really invite him over for her parents to possibly scare him off? But it was too late. He was already driving out of the parking lot. Sure, he said, smiling. I would love that.
Chapter 3. Jeremy. Poem by Jeremy. Hey, Tammy Jo Brown. Can I tell you a secret? I might be famous, singing with my old guitar, but I am just a cowboy. They showed up past 11 at Tammy's house, and yet her mom seemed to have no problem with the late hour, flashing them both a smile. I'm sorry for barging into your evening so late, Jeremy said. No problem at all, Althea Brown said, waving them inside. Come on in. In no time, ice cream tubs were brought out and scooped. Jeremy followed Tammy's lead and sat at the bar. So, Althea said, how's your ma? Jeremy paused, startled. Usually people asked him about life as a superstar, not about normal things. He liked the reminder of his small-town roots. She's good. Mom had her hip replaced a year ago, but it's hardly slowed her down. Althea grinned. Edna sure is an energizer bunny. Keeps on going and going. Jeremy grinned. Yep, that's Mom. I should visit her sometime, Althea said. Her hip replacement might be a good excuse. I'm sure she'd love that. And your brother? Jeremy paused like he usually did when someone asked about Joaquin. Jeremy's younger brother had recently passed through a difficult time in his life. Getting in the military seemed like his only salvation at the moment. Good, Jeremy said, carefully choosing his words. He's getting ready to go into the Marines. Impressive. Althea raised her spoon like a thumbs-up gesture, but her gaze lingered on him like she really wanted to know about Joaquin. Jeremy ducked his head and dug into his ice cream. He snuck a glance at Tammy. She had a chocolate fudge smudge on her cheek. He reached out and wiped it off with his thumb before he could think about it. Her eyes widened, and it seemed that the world spun slowly on its axis. Man, she was beautiful. Jeremy realized that Althea was watching. He cleared his throat. Sorry, he told Tammy. You had a... He gestured toward her cheek. Tammy shrugged, her cheeks turning a cute pink. A little smile hovered over Althea's lips. For the next hour, they talked about people they all knew in Sunnyridge. When Tammy stifled a yawn, he took the hint. He didn't want to be too tired anyway for his performance at Nellie's wedding. Time to let you go to bed, Sleeping Beauty, he said, pushing off from the bar and standing. Busted for yawning, she joked. But as their glances held, he knew she blushed from his compliment. Thank you so much for the fantastic ice cream, Althea, Jeremy said, taking his bowl and spoon to the sink. Anytime, Althea assured him. Jeremy hoped there would be another time. Tammy walked out the front porch with him and closed the door behind her. The light was still on, attracting several bugs. Just a moment, she said, opening the door and flicking off the light switch. They stood in a moonlit semi-darkness, full of possibilities. Jeremy stood between her and the moon, his face casting hers in shadow. He stepped a little to the side so he could see her better. Her face glowed as she looked up at him. His chest tightened with a pang of desire. He could tip her chin up and kiss her. The moonlight was practically begging for it. And then he thought of his conversation with Sue. He had agreed to faking a relationship with Kat. He was always good on his word. Until he could square that away, he couldn't kiss Tammy, although he very much wanted to. Her gaze fell to his lips. So tempting. Good night, he said. Thanks so much for a wonderful time. Good night, she whispered back. He forced himself to turn, walk to his Jeep, and drive away. Without the porch light on, he couldn't see her very well anyway. It wasn't until his tires hit the highway did he want to kick himself. He should have just kissed her. Ah well, there was always tomorrow. With a wry smile because he knew he was just being a wuss, he cranked up the radio and sang along to a rousing country song.
Chapter 4. Tammy. Poem by Tammy. Kat Keller. She's blonde, the very opposite of Tammy. She sings like a sultry summer day. Sunnyridge has never seen anything like her. The temperature rose at her arrival. At 16, she started her own clothing label. That's her on the billboard, on the sofa. She has her own reality show, Kat Keller, and markets pricey weight loss shakes. Tammy woke to sunlight streaming into her window, making her sit up with panic. Nellie's reception was in a few hours. She slept in far too long. Though, in all honesty, it felt great to sleep in, especially after her delicious dreams of a certain cowboy. Jeremy. She sighed, thinking of their sweet goodbye the night before. She was already smitten with him before, but seeing how he was with her mom and the respectful way he cleared his dishes just made her love him more. And then there was that almost kiss on the front porch. In her bones, anyway, she thought he would kiss her. When he didn't, she'd felt a stab of disappointment, followed by relief. She sighed again. Jeremy Hawke, America's country superstar, couldn't possibly be romantically interested in her, not when he could have anyone he wanted. Still, she indulged in imagining him at the wedding, dressed in his signature cowboy style, performing the song he'd written for the couple. She got ready for the day, needing little blush as her color already seemed to be high, and thanking her lucky stars that her hair was cooperating. She put on the rose-colored dress she'd gotten especially for this occasion. She didn't want to be the first to arrive, but when she got there, she still was one of the first. She wandered around, checking out the decorations. Taylor had done a great job doing an elegant but fun theme. There were bales of hay with soft burlap on top as seats for the guests. The tablecloths were also made of the same fabric. Bouquets of sunflowers sat cheerily in mason jars, and hemp-string bows adorned napkins. The reception looked to sit at least 100. Tammy didn't know Nellie all that well, but she knew from school and seeing her around town that they were alike, headstrong and feisty. And now, Nellie had the cowboy of her dreams. That's where their lives differed. Hoping to find Jeremy, Tammy poked her head in the barn, but it turned out empty. She walked around where the band was setting up, but there was no Jeremy. She thought about asking the musicians where their boss was, but she didn't want to come across like some stalker fan. She went over to a little table of appetizers and was helping herself to some cucumber water when Jeremy arrived. Their gazes met across the lawn. A cute blush crept up his cheeks, and his eyes lit up. His expression confirmed that last night was not just a figment of her imagination. Jeremy seemed to like her, too. Just as she was about to carry her drink over to him, his manager, a short-haired woman with a frosty expression, walked up to him and touched his arm. They exchanged some words. Tammy didn't want to interrupt them, so she went ahead and swirled her drink in her fancy plastic cup and pretended to inspect the burlap on the tables. After a couple of minutes, she looked back at him. Jeremy flashed Tammy an apologetic glance, put up a hand to signal that he would be a second, and turned around. Curious, Tammy looked past him at what was going on. On the road, just outside the long drive, a gleaming black limo pulled up. The chauffeur jumped out and opened the back passenger seat closest to the Larkins' rural curb. Out the door came stunning bare legs and slender feet encased in hot pink heels. Jeremy approached the limo, his agent walking alongside him. Tammy was full of questions. Who could that woman be, and why were Jeremy and his agent suddenly interested in her arrival? Could it be some other celebrity who would be performing with Jeremy? The woman emerged from the limo, and Tammy recognized her immediately. It was Kat Keller, pop star turned country superstar, someone even more famous than Jeremy. The couple's star power at that moment was blinding. Kat, raising her face to Jeremy, flashed him a flirtatious smile. Tammy's throat tightened with jealousy. For Tammy, watching the two brought her back to junior high. Tammy had been chubby then, enough extra pounds to make her self-conscious whenever they were at gym. That was the first time she'd noticed Jeremy. At that age, he was already good-looking, filled out and taller than most of the guys in their class, with those all-American pearly whites. When he sang, he brought the house down. The girls swooned and wrote his name on the back of the bathroom stall doors. He was nice enough to Tammy, but there were plenty other girls who wanted to talk to him. Tammy didn't have the guts to join the queue. Tammy blinked, returning to the present. Jeremy was now helping Kat out of the limo, as though they were going down the red carpet. Sunnyridge could have been Nashville. Kat looked a little out of place in the sticks. She wore a tight, hot pink dress. Her shoulder-length blonde hair perfectly mussed around her perfectly made-up face. Still, she was undeniably beautiful and exuded sex appeal. Tammy had known a lot of those kinds of girls in high school. She knew, hands down, she would never win that battle. She didn't want to join the contestant pool in the first place. Would she have to pay that to be involved with someone like Jeremy? She blew out a breath. She'd just as soon date someone normal, raise a normal family, not have to worry about newspapers and tabloids, paparazzi chasing them down the road. Behind the limo, a convoy of little cars parked helter-skelter. Reporters and cameramen ran down the road to take photos of Kat, walking down the drive with Jeremy. Kat looked over her shoulder at the media mob and gave them her sweetheart smile. Jeremy cast a worried glance and tentative smile at Tammy. Tammy's face froze. She couldn't get herself to smile back. She just kept watching, at the same time wanting the earth to swallow her up. Tammy thought she saw a flash of regret on his face before he turned toward the media, placing his arm around Kat's waist. Kat leaned into him. For one long second, Tammy couldn't breathe. When she did once again, pain so sharp and bitter hit her hard. Tears stung her eyes. After last night, Tammy thought she was special. Boy, was she wrong. Jeremy was like most celebrities, easily attracted to the in thing like Kat. Tammy turned around, trying to find a path through the blur of her tears. Fortunately, everyone else, the catering crew, the wedding planner, and anyone else setting up, was preoccupied. No one could see how upset she was. Even if they did, she wasn't Kat, so they probably wouldn't care anyway. She stared at what had been a refreshing cucumber drink. Now, it tasted bitter. She dumped it on the lawn before tossing the fancy plastic cup into the garbage. She heard her name coming from behind her. Jeremy had broken off from Kat and the pack and was approaching her. She was glad her back was turned to him, so she could school her expression. Slowly, she faced him, summoning up a fake smile. "Hey, Tammy," Jeremy said, his bright smile faltering. "I wanted you to meet Kat Keller. Kat, this is a good friend of mine, Tammy." Kat gave her a polite but frosty smile. "This is Sue," Jeremy said, turning to his agent. Sue's smile was even less warm than Kat's. "Nice to meet both of you," Tammy said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to..." Her sentence trailed off into a mutter before she ran away. "Wait, Tammy," Jeremy called out after her. Tammy didn't dare look around. She stood on the spot, waiting like he'd asked, as Jeremy walked over. "Hey," he said, standing by her shoulder. I just wanted to thank you for last night." She glanced at him, annoyed. If last night meant so much to him, why was he acting that way around Kat? Why did he put his hand around her waist and pose for pictures? Tammy knew it wasn't the time and place to ask questions, especially around Sue, who watched them from afar with a dour expression. More people were filing into the wedding. More media people streamed in. They were there to watch Jeremy and Kat perform this duet. In a split second, an imaginary future flashed in front of Tammy. Jeremy would always have duets with other girls. Were they to pursue a relationship beyond friendship? Tammy would need to take the high road and understand that that was just part of show business. But that would be too hard. She would have to give up too much for a sliver of Jeremy. Thanks, she told Jeremy with a firm voice. See you around. The last thing she saw was his crestfallen face. That confused her. At the same time, it made her mad. If Jeremy liked her, then why didn't he show it? Of course, that was asking for too much. That was asking for the moon. She could have said more. She could have said how much she loved the previous night, how thoughtful he had been around her mom, how she wished, while they stood on the moonlit porch, that she hadn't hurried to go inside, how she could have puckered her lips, closed her eyes, and let him kiss her. Let him take her in his arms and slide his lips over hers, like she dreamed of for a long, long time. Now, she couldn't tell him that. She had to protect her heart and close herself off to hurt. No one needed to know about her stupid infatuation, especially Jeremy. No one needed to know how she had been so in love with him. Because a woman like Tammy could never win the heart of a cowboy like Jeremy.
Chapter 5. Jeremy. Jeremy watched Tammy walk away, his heart heavy. Confusion filled him. The night before she had been so warm, but now... He cast a glance toward Kat. Could Tammy have assumed he and Kat were dating? He hadn't meant to give that impression. He was just posing for pictures that were supposed to fool the press. Jeremy put himself in Tammy's shoes. It didn't take a rocket scientist to see why she would make that assumption. Inwardly, he sighed. The pressures of superstardom, they robbed him of joy. First, he'd lost his ability to write songs. The wedding song didn't really count. That was a job. He had been up against a deadline. Now he was talking about a song that meant more than a job to him. Thanks to Tammy, however, last night for the first time in a long time he scribbled down new lyrics right before bed. 3 songs in quick succession. He had been on fire. And he knew it was all because of Tammy, because of the feelings she inspired in him. The songs may or may not sell someday, but his heart lifted from rereading them when he was done. They were gold. The songs were short, about love, about wanting to kiss a girl on a moonlit porch, wishing he could just run away with her, be with her, but the pressures of real life tended to mess up things and distract as they did now. As more people arrived for the wedding, Jeremy couldn't pick Tammy out in the crowd. It wasn't time to chase after her. He would have to talk to her later. For now, he had to focus on the song that he was to perform with Kat. Sue gave him a look like she knew what he was thinking about. Her displeased expression irritated him. Why was Sue pushing him into this? Didn't she care about how he felt? Wasn't it pretty obvious that he liked Tammy a lot? What was so wrong about pursuing a relationship with her? Sure, Kat was beautiful. He glanced at her elegant figure with just the right curves, her beautiful face. He could think of a million compliments for her looks, but he'd been around her enough at their mutual labels parties to know that her beauty was mostly skin deep. He overheard her talking to Sue about her packed day. Her litany of interviews and parties sounded like a complaint fest. Did she not realize how lucky she was? She wasn't an unkind person, but she could certainly act like a diva to get her way. "I must have Perrier," she told a caterer who had been summoned to the scene by Sue. "That or nothing else." The female employee blinked at her. "I'm so sorry," she said. "We don't carry that at the local store." "Well, what do you have?" Kat sounded peeved. "I think the bottled kind from a spring?" "That's fine," Kat said with a grimace before huffing off. Jeremy wished her attitude was better. He'd met her type in Nashville and Hollywood, so self-absorbed and caught up with their appearance. That said, he knew what it was like to be praised for his looks, for girls to shriek and swoon over. Especially early on, he lapped it all up, believing that his worth hinged upon his appearance. hailed as the next country superstar in the making, had gone to his head. His first summer on the road, he hardly came home to Sunnyridge, just went on tour until all the hotels started blurring from one to another and he couldn't tell where he was. One day, packing his suitcase yet again, he realized how empty that life was. Who cared how he sounded or how he looked when he had no one close around? So he started calling his family more, and now he was back in Sunnyridge, back with people who seemed more real than anyone he'd met on the road. This was the place he'd want to live in. Realistically speaking, he probably couldn't live here forever. He had to be on the move, but maybe he could compromise. He didn't have to be gone all the time. Maybe he could use Sunnyridge as a home base. Maybe in Sunnyridge he could have Tammy to come home to. The idea sounded delicious. He shook his head. Any chance he had with her the night before had disappeared into thin air. As he got up to the stage to fiddle with the microphone, he saw Tammy way off in the distance talking to some guy. He wondered who he was and why she was laughing now, and the guy was leaning toward her, touching her sleeve. Jeremy ground his teeth, then kicked himself mentally. If he hadn't kowtowed to Sue and her scheme to make it look like he and Kat were a pair, then maybe Tammy would give him a chance. Jeremy needed to make it up to Tammy after the song. He would seek her out and they would talk, maybe even dance. The thought of holding her made him feel warm inside and lightheaded. He was off in his own world when Kat cleared her throat and said into the mic, "Well, Jeremy, are we going to do it?" "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, startled. "What are we going to do?" Kat rolled her eyes. "Sing!" Onlookers snickered. "Sure," Jeremy said, his cheeks heating with embarrassment. Someone did a mic check. Jeremy's eyes once again strayed to find Tammy. She was no longer standing there. Neither was the man. Hopefully they went their separate ways. Jeremy shook his head. He needed to focus on the song. They had to finish their sound check before the rest of the guests arrived. "All right," he said, "I'm ready." A guitar lick kicked off the song, and all the other instruments followed. Kat's voice soared. Beautiful. For all her faults, she was a fantastic and gifted singer that no one could tire listening to. When her part was done, Jeremy launched into his section. He pictured not Kat, but Tammy, as she stood on her porch last night. Those feelings made him lean into the song with more emotion than he'd genuinely felt in a long time. Kat seemed to sense this, responding with warmth in her voice. The whole place watched them. Everything had come to a standstill. As they got into the refrain, their audience surged forward, crowding the stage. The song reached the final crescendo where Jeremy and Kat declared their love for each other. Nellie and Dax, the happy bride and groom, meanwhile, danced in a circle of friends, their faces glowing with happiness. Jeremy hoped they loved the song enough to make it worth the 20 grand. As the last note died down, everyone broke into applause. Jeremy turned to Kat and grinned. She was beaming. Taking 2 steps toward him and throwing her arms around his neck, she surprised him with a sultry smooch to catcalls and whistles. Jeremy was too stunned to react, and then he was pulling away to put some distance between them. Kat murmured, "Don't be a prude. Play along, darling." Jeremy glared at her. That wasn't the plan. "Oh?" Kat raised an eyebrow. Suddenly struck with panic, Jeremy scoured the audience. Tammy stood in the periphery, her shocked and hurt expression filling him with remorse. He wanted to go after her, but she turned and fled into the crowd. The media had swarmed around them, blocking his path as he tried to chase after Tammy. They threw questions at Jeremy and Kat. "Are you a couple? When did you start dating? When is the wedding going to be?" He denied it all, of course. Kat only smiled mysteriously, keeping mum. Feeding the frenzy. Sue carried on her own interview to the side. Jeremy didn't want anything to do with this, but knew he just had to ride it out, make the best of a fake situation. Later, he would catch up with Tammy.
Chapter 6. Tammy. Tammy ran all the way to the back of the Larkins' massive barn and leaned against the weathered boards. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath that hurt. She imagined Kat kissing Jeremy. Jeremy. Ugh. It sounded like caramel, which ruined her favorite sweet for her forever. Tammy brushed off her pathetic attempt at a joke and instead looked up at the blue, blue sky that was starting to turn a duller gray as the sun dipped in the horizon. She wished she could just be let off and have her wings take her away somewhere where she didn't have to deal with Jeremy. She realized she had put her life on hold for him. Truly, did she even know him? Maybe she simply loved the idea of being with him. Could it be time for her to move on? It was a new, unsettling feeling. She felt adrift. Old habits were hard to break, and her heart ached from the loss. Most of her life, she had waited for him to move on to high school with her, waited for him to notice her, waited for him to talk to her at poetry night. She had nursed this fantasy that he would pick her among all the girls in the world. What a pipe dream. It was just as well she knew now that she absolutely couldn't have him. In her mind, a video loop played of Jeremy kissing Kat and all the cat calls and whistles that had followed. Tammy? Her eyes flew open and her heart thudded. Jeremy had sought her out. She could hear footsteps approaching her from the side of the barn. Looking around, she looked for an escape route. She didn't want him to see her here, and definitely not her crying. But the only way around was where Jeremy was coming from. She brushed her tears away and knew her efforts to salvage her makeup were hopeless. Taking a couple of deep breaths, she ran her fingers through her hair, over her skirt. She waited where she was. Maybe he wouldn't find her or give up before he reached her. But she heard his boots crunch on the gravel nearby. Sure enough, he rounded the corner and stopped when he saw her. "Hey," Jeremy said, his eyes soft and sorrowful. "Hey," she said, trying to smile but failing miserably. "I wanted to talk to you," he stammered. "Oh?" She tossed her head. "Yeah? What about?" "You saw the kiss." The word kiss bounced around her head, ripping her heart open. "Kind of hard not to see in front of everyone." That was all she could manage to say before she had to turn her face away. "For what it's worth," he said, "she kissed me. I was as surprised as anyone." "Well, it doesn't bother me," she lied. "You can kiss anyone you want, Jeremy." She couldn't resist saying with a sarcastic edge, "Especially since you're a superstar." Hurt flashed in his eyes. "I'm just a regular person." "Yeah, sure," she said, her irritation gaining steam. "The only reason the media's here is because of Nellie's wedding. They're not here for you, nor for Kat." "Well, yeah, they are," Jeremy conceded, "but it's not like I asked for them to come," he sighed. I didn't ask for any of this." "Sure you did," she shot back. "You like the attention, don't you? Don't you like getting up in front of people and performing? Doesn't it make you happy?" "It does," he said, wincing, "but not the way you describe it." "Okay." She folded her arms across her chest. "Explain yourself." He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I love performing. I love singing. It really makes me happy. I love writing songs and listening to them come alive. Even that duet back there with Kat. I loved that." "Of course you would," she murmured. A shadow of a smile glimmered in his eyes. "You know what I mean." Actually, she didn't. But her mother had raised her to not say anything if she couldn't say anything nice. "But everything else," he said, his voice dipping even lower, "it's a lonely place to be. It's not worth it if you can't have people in your life who mean a lot to you." "You certainly don't seem miserable with Kat," she observed. "Kat wouldn't act that way around you if you didn't encourage it." He stuffed his hands in his pockets. "Listen, I want to let you in on a secret. Will you promise to hear me out?" She stared at him. She didn't like secrets. Secrets often came back to bite you. Bracing herself, she said, "Okay, what?" He pressed his lips together, then winced. My manager wants Kat and me to pretend to date as publicity for our next album together. She could only stare at him, blinking a couple of times, wondering if she'd heard correctly. It sounded so horrible, even for someone as hard-edged like Sue Bitter. And you agreed to it? Tammy asked, her eyes narrowing. Wouldn't you? He said, but a guilty blush spread across his face, as it should. Would I? She stared at him, incredulous. Would I fake a date with you to sell records? Sure, yeah, I would. Wait, it was his turn to narrow his eyes. You would fake a relationship with somebody for money? Do I think it's horrid? Yes. She nodded slowly. But I can see why you'd want to. That's it. Jeremy made an impatient sound. It makes sense for me to want to, but I don't really want to. She studied his face, noticing that there was a worldly quality to his expression. No longer sweet and wide-eyed, sadness washed over her. What had Nashville done to the cowboy she'd been in love with? Frustration bubbled up inside her. Why did show business have to ruin good people? She'd heard the horror stories. Why don't you tell your manager off? She suggested. Surprise flitted across his face, followed by a wonder. I could, I suppose, he whispered, but I'm kind of deep into things now. A bitter taste rose in her mouth. At some point, she'd liked him. Loved him, even. Right now, she wasn't sure. Well then, she said lightly, I don't see why talking to me about it could help. An urgent tone infused his words. Because when this is all over, I want us to have a chance together. Will you do that, Tammy? You and I? Her heart pounded. A chance to do what? Was this really Jeremy Hawke talking to her? A chance later? What could he possibly mean? He walked toward her, regardless of what she saw on that stage. All she could think of was how near he was, how he smelled so good, like that fresh scent of crisp linen, so sweet, clean, and wholesome, just like Jeremy and Kat. She averted her face. I don't see why. That sounds horrible. He frowned. What do you mean? Why would I want to settle for that? Her voice was quiet. You honestly want me to flirt and wait for you until you're done fake dating? I've never been this insulted in my life. Tammy. He expelled a frustrated breath. I'm not even going to pursue a physical relationship with her. Just some pictures here and there when the album is out. After this, we'll never see each other again. She put her fists at her hips. Would you listen to yourself? Sounds like the most ridiculous thing in the world. She lowered her voice. You ought to know better. I thought at one time you had more depth than that you had something to say. Your poetry seemed to come from a mature place. But now, I realize it's just all words. You don't actually believe what you say. You can turn a phrase, but it doesn't mean much to you, does it? He stared at her, then raked his fingers through that glossy dark hair. You're right. This is stupid. I'd agreed to this since I thought you wouldn't care. Most of our lives, I've never really known how you felt about me. Well, he wouldn't now. I don't know what you're talking about, Tammy said. Sure, you're a pretty face. I like you a lot. I think all of Sunnyridge is in love with you, just like all the world is. But it doesn't mean I've fallen for you. He didn't answer for a long moment, hurt creeping in his eyes, filling her with guilt. Sorry, he said, sounding exhausted. I guess I misread you. I thought that since you had given me mixed signals, I would give you, us, some time. But it sounds like I may not need to do that. Sure, she said, lifting her chin. You just go on with your life, Jeremy, and don't bother me. I'm just a normal girl, and you're a star. I can't have anyway. Even if we want to be together, Sue will always get in our way. Forget Sue. He leaned close until she could feel his warm breath on her face. Forget her. What matters is you and me. She turned her face to the side and closed her eyes, hoping he'd go away, because he sure sounded convincing. I don't want to have anything to do with you, okay? I saw what the press does. I'm just a regular girl, and I'd hate being studied under a microscope like that, having my every move dissected. I know it won't be easy, but you and I could travel and experience life together. There's the public life, and there's the private. His voice lowered, and her chest constricted a hunger she needed to shut down once and for all. Why? Do you really think I want to be with someone who will fake a relationship for the publicity? Besides, I'm not attracted to you. The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue. His eyes searched hers, and then his gaze dropped to her lips. Tammy, why don't you just admit it, for both our sakes, just so I know where I stand? She gave him a cool stare. I said what I said. I know, I heard. He paused. But are you telling the truth? She turned her face to the side and ignored his question. Moments later, his fingers grasped her chin, forcing her to look into his eyes. And just like that, his mouth captured hers. Caught off guard, she didn't respond at first, especially since his kiss seemed driven by anger. But there was something else simmering underneath. A tenderness, a sweetness. In the surprise of his kiss, her own mouth succumbed like a mindless fool. The kiss turned sweet. He was kissing her softly, small nips that had her gasping softly for more. Their kiss deepened, swirling into a kaleidoscope of colors and teasing her senses. Her back arched, and his strong grip pulled her close, his hand traveling the length of her spine, leaving sparks in its wake. His other hand buried itself under her hair, cradling her jaw as their kiss intensified. She clung to him, weak with a passion that had been kept bottled far too long. For as long as she could remember, she'd wanted Jeremy, and now she was in his arms. The reality exceeded her wildest dreams. But then she remembered Kat. He was willing to take up a fake relationship with someone he didn't care about, and yet he wanted Tammy to wait in the wings. Abruptly, she pushed him away, warning him with her gaze not to get close. His face was flushed, his breath ragged. I'm sorry. I wanted our first kiss to be special. Nothing like that. Her heart squeezed in pain. He was already regretting their kiss. It was nothing like what he considered worth remembering. Thank you, she said in as steady a voice as she could muster. At least now I know what it's like to kiss the famous Jeremy Hawke. His expression dulled. Now I can write it in my journal, she added. Disappointment flashed in his eyes before he looked away. Yes you can. You can date Kat all you want, fake or otherwise, she said. Tammy, he said, trying to grab her arm. But she was too quick for him. She dodged his hand and ducked under his arm to get past him. She ran around the barn and walked sedately back once she joined the crowd. The reception was getting into the swing of things. She didn't look back. Despite the kiss, Jeremy was in her past and no longer even a glimmer in her future. She walked on, holding her head up high, even as her heart broke into a million pieces.
Chapter 7. Jeremy. Agreeing to fake whatever this was with Kat had been a stupid idea, possibly blowing his only chance with the girl whose heart he really wanted to win. He could still walk back this whole fake relationship, none would be the wiser. While the media would make inquiries, the label could drop the duets he and Kat were supposed to perform together. Anything to win back Tammy's trust. In the past, he'd not been sure if she liked him. Now he was sure she despised him. He despised himself, too. He moseyed on out to the others at the wedding reception. He'd have understood if Tammy was nowhere to be seen, but there she was, dancing with some guy to a slow song, leaning her cheek against his shoulder. The guy had a pretty good hold of her waist. Clenching his fist, Jeremy veered off to the side, only to run into Sylvia, a girl who'd been on a few dates with his brother Joaquin until he shipped off to boot camp. She had on an apron as her family's diner was catering the event. "Hi, Jeremy," she greeted him. He was so relieved to see her. Frankly, he could use a friend for the moment. "Hi, Sylvia." Sylvia looked over at Tammy and her dance partner. "Who's Tammy dancing with?" "I have no idea," Jeremy admitted, feeling miserable. He'd driven her away and had brought this onto himself. "Are you and Tammy having a spat?" "Why do you say that?" He looked at her in surprise. Sylvia's dark eyes studied him. "She walked out from behind the barn looking upset, and then you followed her out looking bummed out." "That about sums up my evening." Sylvia crinkled her nose. "What's the deal with you and Kat Keller?" Jeremy weighed his words, wondering how much to say. In the end, he decided he was better off sticking to the plan. After all, Tammy said she wanted nothing to do with him. "We're kind of dating." Sylvia's eyes narrowed. "Seriously? You'd give Tammy up for her platinum fakeness?" Jeremy chuckled. "Her what?" "You know what I mean." Sylvia was obviously just revving up, her shoulders curving in like she was spoiling for a fight. "You'll choose her over Tammy, who has always been in love with you?" Jeremy frowned. "Wait, what?" Sylvia covered her mouth with her hand. "Oops, sorry, that just slipped out." "She's always been in love with me." His words came out in a whisper. Jeremy didn't dare hope, but he suddenly felt lighter. Could Tammy have been lying to him about her real feelings? "If you're just figuring it out right now, Einstein," Sylvia said, arching her eyebrow, "then you need glasses." "I know," Jeremy said, groaning. "I've obviously not been paying attention." He blew out a breath. "I think I just turned her off forever. But wait, she told me she's not attracted to me." "Of course she would. You kissed Kat in front of everyone." "Correction," Jeremy huffed. "She kissed me. There's a huge difference." "Whatever. Not your smartest move, doofus." "Ouch." "Okay, maybe that's a bit harsh," she conceded. "But seriously, how would you feel if your crush kisses another girl in front of the world? Not just any girl either, but the Kat Keller." Jeremy bit his lip and considered her words. "Hey, I gotta tell you a secret, but you need to promise to not tell anyone, even your dad." "It depends," she said archly. Between her and Tammy, there was a lot of feistiness going on. After a hesitant pause, Jeremy said, "I'm faking a relationship with Kat so that we get a good boost to sales for our next album." There. He laid it all out, expecting a backlash from Sylvia. He got it all right. "You what?" Sylvia's eyes flashed. "You're breaking a girl's heart over a fake relationship for that very shallow reason?" "We're talking the difference between platinum and gold sales," Jeremy said quietly. "So? Don't you have enough money?" "I'm just trying to level up." "So you're willing to use a girl like Kat to further your ambitions?" "We both are using each other." It sounded terrible, but it was true. "She's no wide-eyed innocent." "What if she falls in love with you too?" Jeremy rubbed his nape. "Kat is too wrapped up in herself to care about someone genuinely." "Oh?" Sylvia raised a brow. "I watched your so-called kiss. She finds you attractive. You better nip your fakery in the bud or you're going to have a whiny diva stalking you." "Maybe, but I highly doubt it. I do need to win back Tammy." He flashed a glance toward the dancing couple. The guy was holding Tammy so much closer than ever. It was all he could do to not march to the dance floor to deck the guy. He turned the other way, gritting his teeth. "Good luck," Sylvia said, her voice dripping with disdain. Jeremy jammed his hands in his pockets. "What do I do? Walk up to the mic and announce that I'm not dating Kat? That'll open a different can of worms. Sylvia shook her head and tightened her apron strings. If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the kitchen. Will you help me win her back? He asked. Frankly, I've had enough of you Hawke brothers, she said. You're on your own, Buster. After she left him, Jeremy kicked at a pebble on the ground. It clattered down a flagstone in the side yard. He didn't need Sylvia's help. He knew exactly what he had to do, but it wouldn't be easy to back out now, not with all the media watching their every move. He would talk again with Kat and Sue and tell them it was a rotten idea. Minutes later, he spotted Sue heading the direction of the bathrooms. Talking to her would have to wait. A commotion caught his attention. At one end of the lawn, beside a towering cake covered with flowers, Nellie was getting ready to throw her bouquet. Girls crowded around her, but Jeremy quickly zoned in on Tammy, who stood at the fringes with Sylvia. Tammy caught him staring and scowled. Okay, ladies, Nellie shouted over her shoulder. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Girls jockeyed for the best position as the bouquet flew seemingly in slow motion toward the back of the crowd, right at Tammy. She stepped back as though the bouquet were on fire, but Sylvia pushed her forward. Tammy caught the bouquet, and everyone clapped. Jeremy couldn't see the expression on her face, but he could tell she was staring at the bouquet. After a couple seconds, she shoved the flowers into Sylvia's hands before storming off. Sylvia's gaze met Jeremy's. She glared at him and followed after Tammy. Jeremy felt like the biggest doofus indeed.
Chapter 8. Tammy. The following day, Tammy woke bleary-eyed. She wasn't ready to face reality. Every cliche of being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and being an early bird getting the worm just made her even more irritated. She forced herself to get dressed for a day of job hunting. At least that could get her mind off that fakey cowboy. She was still smarting from the drama of last night's wedding reception. Why did she have to catch that silly bouquet? It reminded her that she was all alone. Her older brother Gabe was already in the kitchen, seated at the bar for breakfast. He was home for a few days from back east, taking a break from his hoity-toity job as one of Colorado's congressmen. As he read the puzzles on the back of the cereal box, he looked more like the little boy she grew up with instead of a politician. Mom was nowhere to be seen, and Tammy remembered that today was her hair appointment. Since she'd be getting her graying hair colored, she would be gone for a few hours. Good. She didn't want Mom's all-knowing, pitying stare and attempts at being encouraging. Dad was probably outside doing horse chores. Gabe looked up from the cereal box. You look like someone stole your peanut M&Ms. Here we go. Nothing's wrong, Tammy lied. Is it that Jeremy? Boy, did everyone make her business theirs? Of course not, she snapped. Whatever you say, sis. He propped the newspaper on the cereal box and hid his face behind it. Tammy huffed and ransacked the fridge for a couple of eggs. She beat them in a bowl, unleashing all her frustrations out on it. Gabe said, still from behind the newspaper, if you ask me, he was being a jerk last night. That little stunt with that blonde, what does he even see in that girl? Tammy managed a little smile. As much of a knucklehead her brothers could be, she could usually count on them to be in her corner. Do you even have to ask? The newspaper came down, and Gabe stared at her. You're a ton prettier. She's just flashy. Nothing substantial. And rich and famous. You're poor and a nobody. That's better for character. She laughed. That's one way to look at it. Someone knocked on the door, interrupting their conversation. Who could it be? Tammy said, glancing at the clock. It was 8 o'clock. She opened the door and nearly slammed it shut in Jeremy's face. But she resisted the urge, instead putting on her game face. Hey, he said with his superstar grin. She didn't smile back. His smile faltered. Your dad said I would find you here. Behind her, Gabe approached them. What do you want? He asked, sounding every bit like a protective brother. Tammy's heart squeezed with gratitude. Jeremy looked down at his spiffy, shiny boots. I wanted to offer Tammy a job. Gabe's jaw dropped open. Come on in. Tammy glared at her brother. So much for Jeremy being a jerk. Gabe backtracked to the kitchen, put his bowl in the sink, and escaped to the back door. Tammy and Jeremy stood in awkward silence until moments later, when Gabe returned. He went right up to Jeremy. You be nice to my sister, you hear? Or else. I have friends in high places. Jeremy winced and nodded. When Gabe left them, for real this time, Jeremy asked, You told him? I didn't have to, Tammy pointed out. He saw you kiss Kat last night and he thinks you're a jerk. He blushed. Anyway, about that job offer. She crossed her arms over her chest and waited. I want to hire you to write lyrics with me. Tammy gaped at him. Having graduated with a degree in English, writing lyrics with a country superstar would have been Tammy's dream job. If only that superstar wasn't Jeremy. She looked away and considered his offer, before studying him with suspicion. Why? She asked. The truth now. He took off his hat and held it against his chest. His hair was skewed all sorts of ways. Tammy tried to ignore how cute he looked. I'm having a hard time writing songs, he said in a low voice. She stared at him. You said that the other night, but hadn't you written that duet with Kat? Just a fluke, he sighed. It was torture, to tell the truth. The only reason I got it done was because the wedding was coming up, so I had a deadline. I could probably do smaller jobs like a wedding song, not something that has to produce money for my label. She caught the emotion in his voice, frustration, panic, and instantly shut down her sympathy. Still, she said, Sorry, that would suck. Feeling sorry for him didn't mean she should be a doormat. But I can't help you. Wait, he said. She raised an eyebrow. His eyes were soft as a Jersey cow's on a summer day. I haven't been entirely truthful. Her jaw stiffened. Surprise! He swallowed visibly. I wanted to make it up to you, and I knew you were looking for a job, so I thought this could be my penance. When she didn't react, he let the hand holding his cowboy hat drop to his side. It was a stupid idea, I know. Sorry to bother you, Tammy. I'll leave you alone now. He opened the door and walked slowly to his waiting Jeep. Unbidden and unwelcome in her mind, she composed a verse. He turned up the dusty road, his hat in his hand, his shoulders drooping down, deserting his band. She could set aside their personal differences and treat this as a professional opportunity. Her writing could be enjoyed by a worldwide audience. So what if she had to work closely with her longtime crush? That was the past. Jeremy, she shouted. He turned, his expression surprised. When she didn't say anything, he walked back to the front stoop. Yes, he said. Her heart hammered in her chest. I'll do it, on one condition. His cheeks flushed pink, like he was pleased. Okay. She lifted her chin. We will only write songs, nothing else. A smile played on his lips. No books or screenplays. Tears stung her eyes. That's not what I mean. I mean, it's a pure working relationship. His expression sobered as disappointment crossed his features. Yes, of course. I won't court you or nothing. But even as he said those words, his glance lingered over her face, making her weak at the knees. How much is the pay? She said, trying to sound all businesslike. We're already booked for a week in a local cabin. I'll give you a retainer. 10 grand. A flat fee for an album of songs, with co-writing credit. Her skin tingled. Under normal circumstances, this would be a fantastic opportunity. With Jeremy, it was a mixed bag. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, he said. Are you kidding me? She gaped at him. It's very generous for 7 days' work. And putting up with me. He made sad puppy eyes. You're right, she nodded briskly. Add another 50 grand to that. Okay, he said. A laugh bubbled up in her throat. It was a joke. Whew, I'm glad, he smiled. Great. Shall we shake hands on it? She stared at his hand. She was acting like it was a snake when it shouldn't be such a big deal to shake it. His grip was warm and reassuring, and everything she didn't want from him right now. Reminding her of their kiss, her face heated up. Pulling out of his grasp, she nodded. I'll pick you up tomorrow, he said. Pack for however many days as you want, but there will be a washer and dryer at the cabin. Wait, she panicked. You want me to live with you there? I thought I would just commute in. It'd be a lot easier to work on songs together. He looked away. Don't worry, it's a full house. I mean, my manager and staff will be there. And Kat? His gaze faltered. And Kat. Did she expect anything else? Actually, it would be good to have Kat there. It would keep Tammy from falling all over Jeremy like she used to. For 10 grand, she could do this. Okay, she said. His eyes lit up. For a moment, she was mesmerized by his sparkling gaze, his transparent joy. She was already regretting saying yes. See you tomorrow, he spoke softly. See you, she said, trying to sound all business before shutting the door.
Chapter 9. Jeremy. Jeremy whistled on his way from his Jeep to the cabin Sue found on the outskirts of Sunnyridge. He pulled up short and surveyed the property, wild and woolly just like he liked it, with sagebrush dotting the red dirt. The wind blew here constantly, chasing away his weariness from the past year, and now Tammy was going to come to round this out. Of course, he did promise he wasn't going to court her, not during the 7 days at any rate, but it didn't mean he couldn't repair the friendship he'd bungled. Where have you been? Sue barked from the dirt parking lot as he got out of the truck. Out talking business with someone. He shut the door and walked to the cabin door, annoyed more than usual by Sue's brusque attitude. She frowned. Without telling a soul where you were, not even your bodyguards? This is Sunnyridge, Sue, he said, shedding his boots just inside the door and plopping himself on a leather couch. Nothing ever happens out here. I beg to differ. Sue sat on a chair opposite from him. Have you read the headlines in the local paper? Nope. She tossed a folded-up Sunnyridge Times and he picked it up. Scanning the headlines briefly, he read about a burglary at Sylvia's family's cafe. A man had confronted his wife about an affair and chased her into the cafe with its morning patrons. Before he could use his gun, someone wrestled him to the ground. A chill swept over him. I know the cafe owners. I figured you would. Sue's expression softened. Sorry. He stood up, dazed. I have to call them. Excuse me. Sylvia answered at the third ring, sounding muffled, like she'd been crying. Hey, Jeremy said. I saw the paper. She made snuffling noises. I know. It's terrible. Are you guys okay? No, but we will be. Probably. I just wanted to let you know I'm thinking of your family. Thanks, Jeremy. You're good people. Joaquin also reached out to me. I guess he'd heard clear out in Indiana. Tried to call and left a message. I said some mean things about you guys last night. Sorry. I deserved it, Jeremy conceded. Jeremy hung up, relieved that everything ended up okay and feeling a bit better for the grace she gave him. He wasn't off the hook completely, not until he made it up to Tammy. Now he needed to tell Sue. I hired someone to help me write songs, by the way, he told Sue as he returned to the couch. Really? Sue stared at him. Who? Tammy Brown, you remember her? Sue paused and then shook her head. Should I? She's only the most beautiful girl in the world. You will soon enough. Must have been something in his expression, but she gazed at him more intently. Ah, that dark-haired girl. Yes, it's my dark-haired friend. Friend, right. Jeremy Hawke, don't give me that drivel. I mean, do you like her enough to jeopardize your career? Aw, Sue. Jeremy rolled his eyes. You're being overly dramatic. You're ruining your chances with Kat. Jeremy's smile evaporated. And so be it. Not under my watch, buddy. Are you threatening to quit, Sue? She leaned forward. I didn't turn down all sorts of offers to stick with you just to see a deal I've worked on for months go down the drain. Jeremy stared her down. I'm sorry you feel that way, Sue, but I'm still in charge of this operation, not the other way around. She stood, her wiry frame fairly crackling with energy. I plucked you from obscurity, young man. I can unmake you as quickly as I made you. They glared at each other in a battle of wills until Sue's face cracked with half a smile, half grimace. Loony, the two of us. Jeremy's body relaxed, though in the back of his mind he also felt irritated. Lately, Sue had been making a lot of threats. He wished he hadn't made his crush on Tammy obvious. The last thing he needed was Sue interfering in his love life. Yep, nuts. He stood. Okay, you win, Sue said. Don't worry, Jeremy assured her. Tammy doesn't like me anyway. What? Is she some kind of crazy? Nope, she's got a smart head on those shoulders. I told her about Kat. You did what? Sue's face clouded over. I had to. I couldn't lie to Tammy. I had to tell her I was just faking it with Kat. Did I hear my name? A voice clear as a bell sounded from the doorway, which in their wrangling Jeremy hadn't even noticed was open. Hey, Kat, Sue greeted her, giving Jeremy a warning glance to behave. Welcome. We were indeed just talking about you. Kat plumped up her curls and strode in. A muscled man in a collared shirt and jeans followed her, carrying matching white pieces of designer luggage. Kat walked over to Jeremy and kissed him on his cheeks, one after the other. He resisted the urge to gag as a cloud of perfume enveloped him. And what were you saying about me? Kat prodded Sue. Amazing things, I hope. That your partnership with Jeremy would bring the two of you a lot of success. Oh, you are a doll, Kat said. In her red polka-dotted white dress, she looked unreal, like a Barbie come alive. Turning to her muscled entourage, she said, This is Tony, my bodyguard. Tony pushed his sunglasses to the top of his head and grunted. Jeremy wondered if he spoke anything other than Neanderthal. Welcome, welcome, Sue said. Get settled. Have a look around. There's food in the kitchen. I've sworn off real food, Kat said, inspecting her perfect red nails. It doesn't agree with me. I can't swear it off, Jeremy said. My mother taught me not to swear. Sue flashed him another glare. This was going to be a long week. Thank goodness Tammy was coming.
Chapter 10. Tammy. Tammy wished she could tell her mom more about Jeremy, but she wanted to spare her any worries. So she described the week as a job. That was all. I'm so excited for you, hon, Mom said. Tammy finished her oatmeal and rinsed her bowl in the sink. Thanks, I am too. There was a knock on the door, and Mom's eyes sparkled. Here he is. As Tammy opened the door, she stilled the fluttering of her heart at the sight of Jeremy in crisp jeans and a light blue polo shirt that hugged his muscular torso nicely. Hey, he said. Hey, she said back, trying to sound casual, even though she was anything but. He looked past her to Mom. Hello, Althea. Hi, Mom smiled. So good to see you. Same here. He smiled and stood awkwardly, looking down at Tammy's luggage. Is this everything? Tammy glanced at her suitcase that had gotten maybe 2 uses since she started college. There had been little money for travel, and she certainly had no use for suitcases on the farm. Yep. After they said their goodbyes to Tammy's mom, he carried her luggage down the porch steps and toward the huge truck. Not the Jeep today? She asked. Nope. I thought we'd keep it country. Tammy climbed in with some effort. Sorry, he said. I keep meaning to have a step installed, but I haven't yet. It's okay, she said. I'm used to it with my brother's trucks. How are those guys, by the way? Well, you saw Gabe last night. He's home for a bit for the wedding. He seems to impress everyone back east. Seems is the operative word. Here's a secret. We pretty much get the same emails he sends to his constituents. Lots of policy wonk lingo that none of us get in simple Sunnyridge. She made a face. He laughed, his voice a husky low rumble that made her all a tingle. And Bram? Just got married, as you know. He's off in his own world, Stella's expecting, and he's being kinda goofy about it. He always wants to carry her, as if she's gonna break. Stella finally told him to cut it out. First baby jitters, huh? Tammy studied his profile. How would you know about that? For one crazy moment, she wondered if he had a secret baby stash somewhere. An older cousin was that way too. Ah, okay. Speaking of babies, my parents want grandbabies so bad. They were over the moon at Bram's news. Jeremy winced, mirroring her pained expression. Tell me about it. Thank goodness I tore a lot, or my mom would be on my case even more. Tammy looked out her window at the passing scenery on the road going out to the boonies. Her parents were also concerned about her not having a relationship with anyone. Funny. Jeremy and Tammy could both solve each other's problems and populate the world with grandbabies. Too bad Jeremy first had to fall in love with her. And too bad she'd fallen out of love with him. At least, that's what she needed to tell herself. In the cab of the truck, she was acutely aware of his nearness. That musk scent that enticed her senses reminded her of a kiss behind a barn. She clasped her hands tightly on her lap and averted her eyes. Could she be around Jeremy for a week, 24/7, and stay indifferent to him? Jeremy parked the truck in a parking lot made up of lime chips. He killed the engine and faced her, slinging his arm casually over the back of her seat. Thanks so much for helping me. His voice came out in a pleasing rumble. I really appreciate it. No biggie, she said. Anything for moolah? She'd meant it as a joke, but her words came out hard-edged. He winced, then undraped his arm. Yep. She felt bad for being a brat, but did he expect something sentimental? She certainly wasn't doing this to snag a hubby for herself and grandbabies for her parents. He opened the door, and she jumped out like a gymnast landing in a wobble on the driveway. She didn't want it to be all awkward where he had to touch her. Besides, she reminded herself, it wasn't as though they were dating. The cabin was made of rustic logs, with a generous porch and lots of windows. She looked forward to all this nature, the cabin's openness and sun. Jeremy walked ahead, carrying her luggage. His manager stepped out the front door and waited for them. She stared at Tammy like she was a stinky fish head. Tammy, Jeremy said, this is Sue. Sue, Tammy. Yes, Sue said stone-faced. I recall that we've met. Nice to have you here. Her cool expression didn't match her words. It's my pleasure, Tammy said politely, even as she was tempted to run off and never come back. She didn't want to give Sue the benefit of seeing her cave, so she met her gaze steadily. Surprise and admiration flashed in the older woman's expression, followed by a narrowing of her eyes. She stepped to the side. I'll let you get your stuff in your bedroom. To Jeremy, she said, I took the bedroom next to yours and Kat's. Tammy did a double take. Did she just say, oops, Sue said. I meant your bedroom and Kat's bedroom. But the damage was done. All Tammy could think of was how Kat was here to stay. I can take my suitcase, Tammy said. You sure? Jeremy gave her a questioning glance. Yes. Tammy's gaze collided with Sue's, who was watching her like a cat. I'll show her to her room, Sue said. Oh, it's okay, Jeremy began. Yes, Tammy said hurriedly. She can. Jeremy looked a bit crestfallen. Thankfully, he didn't insist. See you in a bit, then. We can have a meeting and go over the next few days. A whole week with this cowboy whose brown eyes melted her heart. She shook away the thought. Sure. Sue led her into the house, which was decorated with animal pelt rugs, mounts, and hammered tin decor, along with personal touches, musical instruments, books, framed album covers. And then there were photos, Jeremy as a boy, Jeremy and a horse, Jeremy with a guitar. He'd smiled a similar smile over the years, boyish and endearing. "Wait," Tammy said. "This is Jeremy's cabin?" Sue nodded, giving her a superior smile like she knew something Tammy didn't. "He bought this last year so he could do retreats." It was a good reminder to Tammy that Jeremy had outgrown their friendship. She would never be privy to intimate details like that. She wouldn't belong to his music circle. Moments later, Sue stopped at a door. "Here you go." "Thanks so much." Tammy started wheeling her suitcase into the room, but Sue touched her arm. "Can I have a candid word with you?" "Sure." Tammy braced herself. Sue's eyes bore into hers. "I've been managing Jeremy for years, and I know his next album is going to blow up. The only way it will succeed is for him to focus on his singing. I understand you know about Kat." "That they're faking a relationship?" Tammy said, the words making her heart ache. "Good." Sue's expression hardened. "Because if we have any missteps, Jeremy's career will be on the line." Tammy's head hurt. Why was this woman telling her all this? She couldn't wait to shut the door on her. "And you wouldn't want that, would you?" Sue added over her shoulder before walking out. Tammy resisted the urge to slam the door shut, then took a few minutes to calm herself down. She avoided unpacking until she knew she had procrastinated enough. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her pen and notebook and headed down. It was time to roll up her sleeves and work, because that was all this was. A job.
Chapter 11. Jeremy. Jeremy turned at the sound of Tammy's approach. He had been waiting outside, sitting on a shaded deck overlooking the back of the property, just stretches of meadow rolling up to blue mountains. "Is now a good time for that meeting?" she asked. "Yeah, sure." He stood and pulled out a chair. As she sat down, her perfume rose to his nostrils. For one moment, he was back at the reception with her, kissing her behind the house. His gaze went to her lips. With difficulty, he wrenched it away and focused on the beautiful scenery around them. Someone had the foresight to plant trees several years before, and now they were tall and broad. The leaves swayed gracefully in the breeze, and sunlight kissed Tammy's arms where the tree canopy had thinned. Her skin had deepened to a golden tan as summer had turned to fall. She was always a working farm girl. He liked that about her. But this wasn't about him and her. It was about songwriting. He returned her gaze. Wrong move. Now he was mesmerized by her warm brown eyes. What was the matter with him? "So," she said, "how do you want to do this?" He cleared his throat. "My thought was, every day we go all over Sunnyridge in the morning or afternoon or evening, depending on the best time, and then come back and write songs." "Go all over Sunnyridge?" She scrunched her nose. "Yeah, go around and do the things that we loved as children. Look at them now as grown-ups." She studied him thoughtfully. "Do you have a title for your album?" He wondered what she'd do if he said, "For Love of Tammy." Instead, he said, "Romance in a Small Town." Her eyes lit up. "I love it." "Thanks. I think you could take that title in different ways. It still might change, of course." "Of course." "There you are." Sue waved from the back door and walked over to them, claiming a chair. "I thought I was going to be in on this meeting." "You were busy talking to Kat," Jeremy said. "Where is she?" "She's taking a nap. You know her, she needs her beauty sleep." "It's 10 a.m. Jeremy kept his tone mild. "She said something about staying up late at a party." Sue shrugged. "Anyway," Jeremy tapped the table, "Tammy and I are making a list." Sue arched a brow. "Of?" "Of places to go in Sunnyridge." Nice." Sue looked unimpressed. Tammy looked at Jeremy. "Well, it should be a list of places you liked growing up." "I can start, but maybe you can remember a few more." He clicked on a pen and held it poised over a notepad. "Finley Street," he said, with the poplars before they all died. Her mouth turned down one corner. That was a sad day. What killed them? Sue asked. Just the ditch drying up, I guess, Jeremy guessed. Lover's Lane. Tammy nodded, her cheeks blushing, making him wonder if she ever went there with a boy. The reservoir, he added, fishing at midnight. Sounds like trouble, Sue drawled. Jeremy's eyes shot over to Tammy's, whose eyes gleamed speculatively. I lost tons of lures there, Tammy said. Me too. He paused. Old Mr. Muir's dance hall, do you remember? I was just about to say that, Tammy said. Jeremy smiled. Like mine's. His stomach flipped when she smiled back. A horse ride up the mountains, she suggested. Jeremy bowed his head and focused. He wrote trail ride on the sheet. They had plenty of ideas already, but hearing them from Tammy got him all excited. You can't forget sunrise or mudding in the flats, she said softly. I don't know if we'll get to all of it, he said, but this is a good start. Sue cleared her throat and the two jumped out of surprise. Let me get this straight. You two are going on dates. No, Tammy said quickly. Jeremy confirmed. Tammy's right. Sue's expression relaxed. Good. You know what? Kat shouldn't be missing all this fun. I'll go check on her. Yes, you go do that, Jeremy said. After Sue left, Tammy rose too. You want to finish ranking the locations? He suggested. She sat once again and leaned forward, peering at the notepaper. Her head was bent close to his, so close he could meet her halfway and their cheeks could have touched. How about fishing? She said. I haven't done that in eons. Me neither, he said, feeling lightheaded. She turned and gave him a quizzical look. He leaned back, looking away. Aren't you going to market? She asked. Go ahead. He handed her the paper. He couldn't seem to concentrate, so she might as well be in charge. She marked fishing, and they talked about the other things on the list. Horse ride made it, and so did the dance hall. He pictured her in a cute skirt and blouse, moving to the beat of the latest country hit and him scooping her up in his arms. The room would be dimly lit, and they'd stand close together. Then we can play it by ear the rest of the time, she said. Sure. Tammy smiled up at him. This actually sounds fun. Time stood still as finally he summoned enough courage to meet her gaze head-on, uncaring if she saw in his eyes the longing he felt. Her eyes widened as she blinked. Ugh, a bug! They both turned to the sound of Kat's voice. She was coming out onto the deck in a pair of short shorts and a frilly white blouse. She zoned in on Tammy straight away. Why is she here? Kat asked. You met Tammy at the reception, Jeremy reminded her. She's helping me write lyrics. Really? Speculation gleamed in Kat's eyes. I can use a lyricist too. I'm sure she can help you with a song or two, Jeremy said. He gave Tammy a questioning glance. Tammy? Tammy gave him a dark look. We'd have to talk about any other arrangements outside of that first before I'd agree. Kat chuckled. Oh dear, I guess that means no. Sorry, Jeremy told Tammy. I should have asked you first. Tammy stood, her face a cold mask. I'll be in the servants' quarters if you need me. The three who remained exchanged glances after Tammy disappeared into the house. Well, Sue said, she doesn't sound like a team player. Tammy always speaks her mind, Jeremy said. One of the things I admire about her. Sue smoothed her pant leg. Kat is good at that too. Jeremy bit his tongue to keep himself from saying too good. He stood. Ladies, I'm going in for a bit, and then Tammy and I are going fishing. Kat stuck her tongue out. Yuck, I'm not going. Good, because Jeremy wasn't exactly inviting her. But we can do something else, Kat coaxed him. Maybe we could go to the ice cream parlor. But you don't like eating, right? He reminded her. She smiled. True, but I like the colors and lighting in a 50s diner. They make for great shots. We don't have a 50s diner here, Jeremy said. You don't? Kat looked scandalized, her mouth forming a huge O. But all small towns do. We have a regular diner and a honky-tonk bar. Sounds positively cozy. Kat leaned back and raised her face to the sun. We might be out late fishing, Jeremy told Sue, then winced. He sounded like he was asking permission. Don't get eaten alive by mosquitoes, Sue said, her glance full of warning. Obviously not just about bugs.
Chapter 12. Tammy. Tammy's annoyance over Jeremy's offer to Kat faded in a bit. She wasn't one to hold a grudge for too long. Life was too short thinking bad of others. Besides, Jeremy was just trying to help her get more work, which she would need more of after this gig. However, it would take a lot of convincing for her to work for someone like Kat. Tammy suspected that the superstar's idea of songwriting is for someone else to bust her chops while Kat got all the credit. After a barbecue dinner of hamburgers, which Kat declared was very good, was there anything Jeremy couldn't do? Tammy and Jeremy got in his truck to head on up to the reservoir. The awkwardness that had sprung up between them over their earlier conversation had pretty much disappeared once they were out on the open roadaways. It was a glorious day, perfect for a little drive. The road to the reservoir had cattle around it, unpenned, so Jeremy had to play dodge a cow for the first few minutes before the road became deserted. He turned down a path which wound round to a parking lot, and eventually the reservoir. She hadn't been here since she was a child, and she regretted not taking advantage of a watering hole being so close to her hometown. There was never anyone to go with. Her brothers didn't exactly count, but now... Jeremy opened Tammy's door and went to the pickup bed to gather 2 fishing poles. She carried the tackle box and a styrofoam container full of worms. Jeremy pulled out a bag from his front pocket. A different kind of worm. Gummy worms glinted in their cool colors in the setting sun. I'll take a nibble, she said. For some crazy reason, his gaze fell to her lips, and she started thinking of a kiss, too. When he turned away, she resumed breathing with relief. Think fishing, not kissing. They walked side by side and sat on the reservoir's sloping wall, past piles of rocks along the bank. The mosquitoes were out in full force, even though there was still maybe an hour or so of light. I should have put on some bug spray, she said as she slapped at her arms. Fortunately, she was wearing jeans and cowgirl boots. She planned to throw on a light jacket once the sun dipped down and the night cooled off. I've got some, he said, intent on getting the fishing rods ready. In the tackle box. She sprayed herself liberally and then handed him the canister, which he waved off. Good thing you had that spray, she said. The mosquitoes were eating me alive. He chuckled. That's because you're sweet. Tammy pretended to not hear the flirtatious note in his voice. He had promised to not court her, and he'd better stick to the plan. Despite the mosquitoes, it was a pleasant evening. The sun had already sunk low in the horizon, bathing everything in a hazy orange glow. The temperature was still warm from the day's heat, and the crickets were now starting their chorus. Tammy put a worm on the hook and cast her line into the water, feeling her body relax. Nice, isn't it? Jeremy said. He'd also already cast his line, his plaid shirt sleeves folded to his elbows. Tammy sighed happily. Yep, I haven't been this relaxed in a long time, he said. I have a girlfriend who thinks this is the most boring thing in the world, Tammy said. Too much waiting. That's what I love about it, though. The surprise, the unpredictability. Me too, he said. Their glances collided and skittered away. Tammy's heartbeat went wild. She was being silly. He was just talking fishing. But she acted like they were baring their souls. You know, your dad taught me how to fish for a Scout Merit Badge, Jeremy said. Tammy raised a brow. No kidding. Out on a boat on the lakes. I might or might not have dropped my pole. I got so excited with my first bite. She laughed. Did you have to dive for it? No, Jeremy shook his head. Luckily, your dad put his arm in the water and got it before it sank deep. Lucky indeed. Her fishing pole jigged up and down, and she tugged on it to set for a fish, hopeful. As she reeled the line in, she felt that familiar drag. I think I've got one. He pulled his line in, then watched her, making her feel self-conscious. The fish fought for a minute, and then she reeled in a nice trout. Woohoo, she said. First catch of the night. She glimpsed Jeremy's admiring glance, making her cheeks warm. Good to know we won't starve to death if we had to rely on our fishing, he said. She chuckled. Don't count on it. Maybe, Jeremy said, his voice low and casual. We can go on a backpacking overnighter and catch fish for our supper. Her face heated up. His words conjured up a situation that was unlikely to happen. They didn't have any future together. His manager would always make sure of that. Besides, Tammy couldn't possibly turn Jeremy's head while Kat was around. What do you think? He said, this time raising his eyes to hers. Does that sound like something you'd like to do? Hiking in the day, cooling off at the springs, guzzling water in the shade, sleeping under the stars. Why was he torturing her with false hope? Nah, she said. I think we should stick with simple things we can do from town. Jeremy nodded, his mouth drooping at the corners before he flashed his trademark smile. Sure. Okay. Had he really wanted to spend time with her? She didn't dare speculate, only to set herself up for disappointment. He perked up when he caught a fish next. After putting it up beside Tammy's, however, he winced. Methinks your catch is bigger than mine. No surprise there, she teased. His eyes gleamed as he gazed back at her, but he didn't say anything. For the next little bit, one or the other was catching a fish, and their haul piled up quickly in the ice chest they'd brought. After a while, she didn't put a worm on her hook, and instead lay on the blanket to look up at the sky. Soon dusk would come, and mosquitoes be all over them. For the moment, with a slight breeze, this felt nice, just hanging out, fishing. Nothing felt forced. Looking up at the blue sky reminded Tammy of Jeremy, beautiful, but out of reach if his manager would have her way. Her throat ached with sadness. He set aside his pole, too. I guess we're about wound down, huh? Yeah, she said, and then made the mistake of glancing up at him. His eyes drank her in, drawing her into a web of wonder. His scruff cast an appealing shadow on his angular jaw. Tammy felt a tug of desire tighten in her chest, accompanied by a rippling fear. She sat straight up. We should go. His brows came together in confusion. Why? Tammy didn't answer, just started gathering up their things. She dropped the styrofoam cup of worms, which luckily didn't spill, and reached down for it at the same time as Jeremy did. When his hand touched hers, she pulled back as though scalded, her heart racing. She scrambled over the rocks and up to the path that would lead to Jeremy's truck. Hey, wait up, he said, sounding breathless. She slowed down enough for him to catch up. He gripped her arm. Tammy. His eyes searched hers. Was he going to say he'd made a mistake? That he was ready to throw Kat out of his cabin? I had fun tonight, he said. Fun? Was that all Tammy was to him? A diversion from Kat? The real deal? She nodded and pulled away from him and his distracting nearness. In the truck, she looked out the window, silent, as he drove. How could she even think of lyrics for fun songs when she felt all dark inside? That fear of abandonment, ever since she was little and she and her brothers were passed from foster home to foster home, reared its ugly head. Getting involved with a normal guy was one thing, but the chances of her being dumped seemed so much greater with a celebrity. She would never measure up, no matter how much she tried. She closed her eyes to will the voices away, but they were still there. "You okay?" Jeremy's voice rose above the rumble of the truck engine. She opened her eyes. His face held a concerned expression. "Yes," she lied. Once at the cabin parking lot, Jeremy killed the engine and made no move to get out right away. Lights were on in the cabin. In a few minutes, they would return inside, and they would no longer be alone. Perhaps it would be that way for the rest of the songwriting retreat. Wasn't that what she wanted? She reached for the door handle and made her escape.
Chapter 13. Jeremy. Jeremy shouldn't have chickened out, but he did at the last minute. The night before, he'd wanted to say, "I loved spending time with you," but her silence hadn't exactly been encouraging. Obviously, she didn't share his feelings. Her flinching at his touch was a dead giveaway. Besides, what did it matter? For the next week, he'd given his promise, hadn't he? He wasn't supposed to flirt or declare himself, at least not while they were writing songs. But it didn't mean he couldn't declare himself through song. With this little concession leaving the door open in his mind, he followed her to the cabin. She walked with purposeful strides. For as long as he'd known her, she'd never struck him as a girly girl. You could even say she was tomboyish. She was a strong woman, his equal. He'd always admired that about her. His chest constricted with longing. He wanted more than just a friendship. He was willing to be patient, though. The last thing he wanted to do was to scare her off. Sue and Kat glanced up as they entered the living room. Sue studied his face, which he hoped had a fairly neutral expression, but he could tell by the flaring of her nostrils that she was forming her own paranoid conclusions. "Glad you're back," Sue said. "It's time to work on a song. We can do it right here." "Sure," Jeremy said, heading to the kitchen. "Just need a drink and I'll be ready. Do you want one, Tammy?" Her glance flicked away, then back. "Sure." He grabbed 2 glasses of water and they settled at the table. Kat wandered over. "Glad you're back. Sue's no fun." She cast a cool glance at Tammy. "How does this exactly work?" "I'm just going to scribble some lyrics first," Tammy said. "But if you have any you want to brainstorm on, let me know." "Okay." Kat flipped open her magazine. "Have so much fun." Jeremy settled into his chair, tapping his pencil on the notepad. His gaze kept drifting to Tammy and how she had a cowgirl boot-clad legs stretched under the table. Keeping a straight face and pretending to look at his notepad, he tapped his boot against hers. Her eyes flew to his face. He flashed her an innocent look. She pursed her lips and pulled back her boot. He stifled his smile, then froze as he caught Sue watching him. Eventually, Jeremy focused on his paper. The creative juices were returning, and a buzz thrummed in his veins. He hadn't felt this fired up in a long time. He darted an excited glance toward Tammy, who seemed to sense a change. "What?" she asked. "I think I got something," he said. "Let's hear it," Tammy said. She gave him an encouraging glance. "Just phrases right now," he said. "Sunset glowing on your skin, your rosy lips. Having you beside me, I could sit here forever. I've never felt like this." For the next few minutes, the words poured out of him. He thought back to the memory of him and Tammy fishing, just letting his heart open. Occasionally, he looked right at Tammy, whose expression was hard to read. Sue and Kat both looked stunned. "That's it," he said when he was done. He felt happy but exhausted. That took a lot out of him. Tammy's expression tightened, her eyes pricking with tears. Her neck turned pink and so did her cheeks. She stood and ran out of the room the direction of the deck, leaving Jeremy and the rest dumbfounded. "Excuse me," he said, following after Tammy. He found her leaning against the railing. The sun was nearly down past the horizon, the colors still beautiful but fading. He walked over to where she stood. "What's wrong?" "This was a mistake," she said fiercely as she stared him down. "My coming to co-write." Why do you say that? First day and you've already broken your promise. How so? He was terribly confused. You said you wouldn't flirt, but you are too. Her eyes flashed. Be honest, what was that song about? It was inspired by us fishing, he admitted. But that's what all songs are. They're inspired by a truth in real life. You take the experience and you translate it into a song that's universal. He paused. You think that's flirting? You must think I have no feelings when you share things like that. Absolutely not. He raked his fingers through his hair. I actually do care about your feelings. His voice lowered. I care about you. See? Tears glistened in her eyes. You're doing exactly like you promised not to. He blew out a breath and studied her. What do you want me to do, Tammy? We had a fun evening. I would even say it was a fun date. Should I write about eating a sandwich instead? You're breaking the no flirting rule with a workaround. She glared at him. He returned the glare, then waggled his eyebrows. They stared at each other for a long moment, and then she busted out laughing. Okay, she said, wrapping her arms around her stomach. Maybe I'm overreacting a little bit. He smiled back. Maybe a little. He got quiet. But seriously, if I promise to not write any love songs about kissing trout, will you come back and help co-write? She bit her lip, looking cute. His promise seemed harder than ever to live up to. She blew out a breath and winced. I'm worried that my lyrics will never measure up to your standards. Don't worry, he said. I feel the same way. We can both feel inadequate. She smirked. Jeremy Hawke feeling inadequate? I find that hard to believe. But there was sympathy in her voice. Right, you know me. I'm like Superman. He smiled. You're talented, Tammy. Just working with you has inspired me. The door to the cabin opened. Everything okay, kids? Sue asked. Yeah, Jeremy said. We'll be right in. Sue just stood there. Jeremy wished she would give them a few minutes, but was there anything else to say? I think it would be best if you wrote your stuff in private, Sue said. Give each other lyrics at the end of the day. Then we can powwow. Jeremy's heart sank, but between his manager and Tammy, they had him outnumbered. We can swap lyrics, sure. Like ships passing in the night. Just like how Tammy wanted. I can make notes on them, Tammy offered as a concession. If you want. He teased. That's why I hired you. I'll see you guys later, Tammy said, practically running back into the cabin. Jeremy glanced at Sue, then swiveled toward the rail. He had been so hopeful, optimistic, and yet it seemed he was not only getting nowhere with Tammy, things were getting worse. Sue came over and stood beside him. So, why'd she run out in a huff? It's between me and her, Sue, Jeremy said. You know you can tell me anything. Jeremy gritted his teeth. I will tell you what you need to know. Very well. Sue's smile didn't reach her eyes. As your manager, I need to give you advice to help your career. If it were up to me, I wouldn't have hired her. You need a team player. But I did, so there. She raised her hands, nodding while slowly backing away. Gotcha. After she went inside, Jeremy looked out into the darkness, glad for some quiet so he could think. Tammy's message was clear. This was just work. The sooner Jeremy got that through his thick skull, the better.
Chapter 14. Tammy. Tammy needed to retract her claws, she knew, as she was going to make the week bearable for them. The following morning, she came out to the dining room, acting like everything was normal. Jeremy's glance flicked at her, and then back down at the notepad he was writing on. His coldness cut like crazy. Kat was nowhere to be seen. It was 9 o'clock, so Tammy supposed that it was still too early for the resident diva. Sue was reading the paper at the kitchen bar. Kat, the diva? Who was Tammy kidding? She was sure that Jeremy thought Tammy was putting on the diva act. Tammy passed Jeremy and handed him a sheet of paper where she'd scribbled a fishing poem, worth the wait. Here you go. He stared at it and then took the paper from her. She went to the bar and helped herself to some cereal and a little milk. She didn't dare look at him. But when she finally did, she felt a shiver up her spine. His eyes gleamed with approval. "This is fantastic," he said. "Thanks," she said, her cheeks warming up. "The poem came to me this morning." She left out the part that the lyrics came to her so easily. It was almost freaky. "I love it," Jeremy said. "The phrasing, the visual imagery, perfection." He read out loud. "He slips the bait on the hook and swings it overhead, lets out line and waits a while, just like Papa said." "I want to see," Sue said. Jeremy brought it over. Tammy focused on her cereal, waiting for Sue's verdict. Sue shrugged. Pedestrian at best. Tammy's spoon clattered noisily in her bowl. Jeremy glanced at Tammy. Then his head swiveled to his manager. "I disagree, Sue." Sue raised her chin. "You're entitled to your opinion, Jeremy, but I'm looking at it for its commercial value. Sorry, Tammy, for being blunt. This business isn't for sissies." "No, it's okay," Tammy said. She wasn't about to admit that Sue's comments devastated her. "Is there anything specific that I can improve on?" "It's too safe," Sue said. "You aren't putting yourself in it as much as you could. If the lyrics were used by Jeremy, the emotion is too distant." Tammy masked the emotion swirling inside her by lowering her glance. "Noted. Good. We just don't want to waste anyone's time." Sue pushed her bar stool out. "So, what's on the docket for today?" "Trail ride up the canyons was what I was thinking," Jeremy said. "Did someone say horses?" Kat joined them, her perfume floating around her. "Count me in." It would have been rude to refuse, though he wanted Tammy all to himself. "Yes, we were planning on it." "You should have told me, and I could have asked my parents," Kat said. "They have beautiful thoroughbreds." "Maybe next time," Jeremy said. Tammy tried to not let that phrase bother her, but she already imagined that Jeremy would be riding trails with Kat someday on her parents' derby winners. Kat gave Tammy's cereal a scathing glance. "Is there anything around here not made of carbs?" "I believe there's a hunk of raw meat in the fridge," Jeremy said. Tammy's mouth twitched. She snuck a glance at Jeremy, who was pressing his lips together in an effort to suppress a smile. "Ugh," Kat grimaced. "No thanks. I usually skip breakfast, but since we'll be riding horses, I will need some energy. Sue, darling, how about doing a Starbucks run for me?" "First off," Sue said, "your bodyguard Fabio can get that for you. Second, there's not a Starbucks here, but there is a coffee shop." Kat tossed her hair to the side. "Very well. I will ask Tony. I'll be right back. Don't leave without me." Sue looked at her watch. "I have a phone call to the office. I'll take it in my room." Tammy's body relaxed. She could breathe easy without the two women scrutinizing her every move. Jeremy's voice cut into her thoughts. "You want to see what I've got so far?" She hesitated before saying yes. Part of her wanted to see the workings of Jeremy's creativity. Part of her was nervous. He handed her a sheet of lined paper, and she scanned it quietly. "Please don't take offense," he said. "That's what poured out, and it's beautiful. It's essentially like last night's." He squinted at her, confused. "I was a brat last night. Sorry." She pursed her lips. "It reads well. Good job." Jeremy beamed. "Thanks. As for yours, Tammy, I really like your lyrics. Just maybe tweak it a bit." "Sure. No big deal." She moved to the sink to wash out her bowl, swallowing down her pride. Jeremy brought over his mug, too. She turned, and then they were standing face to face. She dodged one way, and he leaned the same, and then he was holding her by the arms. It was like a comedy skit, and they both laughed. His hands loosened their grip, and his smile evaporated. as did hers. Jeremy's gaze fell to her lips. Her breath caught in her throat as his face inched closer. It was so tempting to lean forward, too. But then she remembered this was work. "Excuse me," she said, stepping out of Jeremy's grasp and around. Chapter 16. Tammy. Tammy took a sip of her root beer and looked up as Sue and Jeremy joined her out on the deck. Good, because Tammy couldn't wait to dig into the takeout from the diner. "Kat's not joining us," Jeremy said. "She says she doesn't want dinner." He headed to the barbecue to grill some steaks. Tammy hid her smile behind her glass of orange soda. Kat's spectacular fall from sugar was something to behold. Jeremy was focused on grilling, while Sue was reviewing what looked like contracts. Despite Sue's abrasiveness, Tammy had to admit she was a hard worker. "I wrote a poem this morning," Tammy told Jeremy. "Not sure if they can be used for lyrics, but it was fun anyway." "Oh?" Jeremy said, moving a step away from the grill. "Let's see it." He scanned the poem she'd written longhand, which read, "Cat rode sugar to match her white jeans, pointed her nose up like no one was worth beans, and said tacking up was hard, call the Marines." Jeremy rode quiet, the strong, silent type. 'Twas sad that with Tammy, he still held a gripe. He just answered yes or no, or some such tripe. So Tammy ignored him and focused on Kat, who was fiddling around with this and with that, not listening to warnings under her hat. They went a ways till they reached a cattle guard. Kat yanked on the reins to move Sugar forward. Jeremy warned her, stop, but her head was too hard. Pulled on the rein strong, Sugar knew what to do. The horse reared on hind legs, as she'd been trained to. Sent Kat a-sailing on a pile of horse poo. The two, watching on, gaped at the incensed blonde, who stared daggers at Sugar, not at all fond. They stifled their smiles in a like old times bond. Once back on the saddle, all Kat did was whine, while Jeremy cast glances sweet and divine at Tammy, who daydreamed, could he still be mine? Jeremy burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" Sue asked, looking up from her patio chair. "Nothing, just an inside joke." He returned the poem to Tammy. Sue frowned for a minute, but went back to her reading. Jeremy whispered to Tammy, "The answer to that last question, by the way, is yes." Tammy felt foolish. Why had she written the poem the way she did? But as his answer warmed her from the top of her head to her toes, she knew why. Wishful thinking? It was too late to take it back. "It's fictional," she joked. "Uh-huh," Jeremy said, but his eyes glinted. "And it probably won't work as a song. Who knows? I wouldn't rule it out. Not the way it's written." "Leave that up to me, Chuck." He tapped her chin with a finger. That simple gesture made her heart jump. Sue barked, "Okay, folks, time to break it up. Let's get on with dinner. We have an early start tomorrow." "We do?" Jeremy said. "Yes, sirree," Sue said. "You told me to look up sunrise, remember?" "Did I?" Jeremy said. "That sounds way early." "That's usually the nature of sunrises, buddy," Sue said. Jeremy flashed Tammy a conspiratorial grin. "Let's just stay up and sleep in." "What say you, Tammy?" "I'm all for the sunrise," Tammy said. "You can always go back to bed." "Deal." His eyes glimmered with pleasure. She liked this back and forthing. Her sassiness was coming out once again. Jeremy Hawke, the country singer, no longer scared her. Too much. "Jeremy Hawke," Sue squawked. "The grill's on fire." "Holy cow!" He sprayed down the flames with a bottle of water. "Sorry, I guess I was distracted." His eyes, brimming with amusement, met Tammy's.
Chapter 17. Jeremy. Poem by Jeremy. Tammy. Welcome to the Valley's sunrise show. Midnight blue turns to indigo. Purple lazes cross the sky. Scarlet slyly says hi. Amber gives a yawn. Yellow counts down. 3, 2, 1. And then, sun. Cat. Why must we wake up this early? Why? I'd no time to contour my eye. My hair's a wild rat's nest snarl. Ugh, my face was in a brawl. Morning is my pet peeve. I still can't believe, or worse, forgive, I woke up. Just for that? Jeremy had to splash water on his face to wake himself up, and even then it was a half-enthusiastic attempt. It was still dark outside, heaven's sakes. Who was up this early? Tammy and Sue were. They were already waiting downstairs in the living room when he came down. Tammy's hair was bunched up in a messy bun and she wore no makeup, but Jeremy thought she was still beautiful. Sue was sipping her coffee the way she liked it, black, no sugar. "Where's Cat?" Sue asked. "Sleeping in?" was Jeremy's guess. "Shall we go?" Tammy suggested. "Or we'll miss the sunrise." Jeremy glanced at the wall clock. "We'd better." Sue hesitated before following them out. They'd just stepped into a morning chill and were headed to Jeremy's truck when Kat screeched from the cabin. "Wait for me!" Bummer. Any hope for enjoying a quiet sunrise fled. Jeremy turned good-naturedly toward Kat. "Come on over." "Hold your horses," she said, scrambling to put on designer running shoes. I'm coming. Jeremy held the passenger door open for Tammy, but she got in the back. Jeremy winced at the not-too-subtle rejection. Kat carried a bag that rattled when she got in the passenger seat. Jeremy got behind the wheel, his eyes meeting Tammy's in the rearview mirror. He blinked back into the moment when Kat asked Sue, "Where do you get coffee like that this early?" "Cup of Joe's," Sue answered. Kat said in a plaintive voice, "Can we stop for—" "No," the three said. Tammy's eyes met Jeremy's again in the mirror. She said firmly, "We'll definitely miss the sunrise if we double back through town." Kat whimpered, "Okay." She then proceeded to put on her makeup. So, that was all the stuff making a racket in the bag. They drove on the highway to the outskirts of Sunnyridge, round a bend and up a winding road to an overlook. Jeremy parked and helped Tammy, then Kat out. "I've got 3 quilts in the truck bed," he said. "Any takers?" "Please," Kat said. "You bet," Sue said. Tammy piped up, "Yes, please." Jeremy rubbed his hands to warm them after distributing the quilts. Tammy sat on a rock, spread out the quilt over her shoulders, and then turned to him. "You don't have one." He almost teased, "Want to share yours?" But he knew better. "No worries," he said. "I'm tough." Tammy gave him a sideways glance and opened up her blanket to him. His heart thudded. He didn't need a second invitation. He moseyed over and joined her on the rock she was sitting on. Her expression was delicious to watch. Fear, regret, and excitement before facing forward so he could no longer scrutinize her reaction. He sat next to her, grabbed the edges of the blanket, and wrapped it around both of them. Sue turned to look at them, then rolled her eyes before facing forward. Kat was busy finishing her makeup. Tammy smelled good, sweet, like flowers, warm like the sun. She turned and glanced at them through her lashes. If they were alone, he'd have stolen a kiss. Tammy jabbed him in the side. "Look, Jeremy." He looked the direction she was pointing at. The light had broken in the horizon, first a little seep of promise, and then the sun threw out its rays, spreading above the mountain range. The purples turned to a deeper blue, and then a pale turquoise, until the sunrise crested over all that magnificence. "It's beautiful," Tammy breathed out. He glanced down at her shining eyes, her glowing skin, her parted lips. "It sure is." Tammy was like a sunrise, warm and amazing. "That's it?" Kat said into the awed silence. I got up for that? Jeremy shook his head and said under his breath, Unbelievable. Time to go, caterpillars, Sue said as she passed them. Caterpillars? Jeremy echoed. The way you're cocooned. Seriously. Jeremy opened up the blanket, flapping his butterfly wings and making Tammy laugh. He put the blankets in the truck bed and watched Tammy get into the back seat once again. He wished things could be different, that Tammy knew she belonged next to him and would take her rightful place in his front passenger seat. Kat and Sue would be back at the cabin or somewhere else. Jeremy would drive down the road with Tammy's hand in his. He got behind the wheel, sneaking a glance at her. Her face was turned toward the window. Was she still fixated on not acting on their feelings? Because he was ready to jump in, eyes wide open. But he had to be patient. Chapter 18. Jeremy. Over breakfast, Jeremy gazed thoughtfully at Tammy as he ate his cereal. He needed to get her away from Kat and Sue and spend time, just the two of them. Afterward, as he and Tammy both walked over to the sink to clear, he bumped her at the shoulder. What are your plans tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow? I was just thinking, he said, since it's Sunday. Oh. Tammy covered her blushing face with a hand. I'd forgotten. Shame on you, Tammy Jo Brown, Jeremy teased, for forgetting the Sabbath. So what are you doing? Go to church, she said, leaning against the counter. Spend time with family? Do you care? No, not at all. I was actually wondering if I could invite myself to spend the day with you. She flicked a glance at him, then away. Is this considered work? Just as a friend, he added. After a moment's hesitation, she said, I'm sure Mom would love to feed you. Great, he smiled. I still remember all the cookies she used to send me home with to share with my brother and Mom. How's that brother of yours, by the way? Doing good, I reckon. He doesn't write home much, at least not to me. Is your mom still all worried about him? Probably always will. Jeremy leaned against the counter beside Tammy. For a while, she'd hoped he'd change his mind. Now her prayers are more the keep him safe kind. I hear that he and Sylvia are getting serious. They had been, but not as much now that he's actually left. Tammy raised an eyebrow. She's liked him forever. Plus, I gotta admit, he's a catch. He got all the looks, and I got the pipes, right? He winked. Tammy bit her lip. Anyway, sure, he's nice to look at, but he's gonna be gone for a while. A military life's not exactly family-friendly. Yeah, I hear you. Some decisions they're having to make would be a killer. Tammy stared off in the distance. So, Jeremy said, can I spend Sunday with you? Mom would love to have you to dinner. I don't even need to ask. I meant, he bumped into her arm playfully, can I follow you around all day? It won't be very exciting, she warned, compared to what you're used to on the road. To be honest, Jeremy assured her, I'm good with normal.
Chapter 19. Tammy. Church wasn't until noon, with a standing invitation for brunch with the family at 10:30. Tammy set the alarm for 8, but woke naturally to sunlight filtering through her curtains. She smiled to herself, thinking of Jeremy coming to spend the day with her family. On second thought, she should really warn them that this, his attending church, eating supper with the fam, meant nothing. Though, of course, if she tried to explain that this was nothing, it would most likely make them speculate that their relationship was more than that. Especially knowing Gabe. Ugh, who knew what her prankster of a brother would do? She stretched and got up, showering and changing into a dress she'd brought over for Sunday services. It was a soft denim blue sheath that was comfortable and flattering. As she pulled it over her head, she pictured a girl holding a posy of sunflowers and sporting a summer bonnet. She was not that kind of girl. Tammy had grown up more of a rough-and-tumble tomboy. Hay was usually her hair accessory, and if she had flowers in it, they ended up there by accident. But today, she took special care to be that girl. She put a bit of mousse in her hair, formed some waves at the tips, and pulled it back loosely with a clip. Her eyes glowed, and her face was dusky olive from a whole season of sun. Taking a deep breath, she made her way downstairs to the Commons, where Jeremy was playing around on his guitar. A riff he was trying ended in an abrupt note as he lifted his eyes to take her all in, once and then again. "Wow, you're beautiful," he said. "Thanks." She was desperate to deflect attention from herself. "What are you playing?" He smiled. "A Sabbath sort of song." "You have lyrics yet?" "Not really." He pointed to a blank notebook filler sheet on the coffee table. "I'm exploring the mood of the piece, finding a good hook and melody." "I would let you keep working on it," she said, glancing at the clock, "but we should probably head out to my folks in a half hour." "Sure, we can go anytime." "I guess if you're ready, we might as well go over," she suggested. "You can bring your guitar and play while I help Mom fix brunch." "Sounds good." Kat and Sue didn't make an appearance at all. Sleeping in, most likely, much to Tammy's relief. Jeremy drove them down in his truck to Riverdale Ranch, the Browns' sprawling property. "I always envied you growing up here," he said as he turned the engine off. "How come?" Tammy turned to him in surprise. "To have all this space." "But you grew up on a farm too," she pointed out. "Not a real working farm," he smiled sheepishly. "We owned a couple of horses, sure, but nothing like this." He paused. "Plus, your uncle seemed super fun." Tammy thought of her dad's 5 cowboy brothers. "Yeah, they sure can be a hoot." She followed his gaze out the front windshield at the farmhouse, barns, equipment, and the horses grazing on acres of pasture that stretched for miles. "It's a lot of muck work, let me tell you," she said. "But sure, it was a lot of fun living here. I'm grateful for this place. I always did say that if I had to survive in the wilderness, I got a lot of practice right here with my 2 brothers. I had the job of taste testing everything. I guess they figured if I didn't die, it wasn't poisonous like they thought." He laughed as he got out to help her. As she placed her hand in his, a delicious feeling surged through her. She could picture taking a Sunday stroll with him down these smaller roads, and maybe he would lean toward her as they linked arms. But first, her family. He followed Tammy up porch steps, which held the surprise of a dog who was asleep and a white cat who scattered at his approach. The dog, a graying mix of heeler and collie, raised his head and stretched. "Hey, Gus," Tammy said, rubbing the dog's belly. The door flew open. Tammy's mom threw her arms wide, and Tammy walked right into them. It felt good to be home. "Well now," Mom said, beaming at Jeremy. "It's good to see you again." "Sorry, I didn't warn you ahead of time," Tammy whispered, but Mom waved her hand. "You know I like surprise guests, especially cowboys." Mom winked. "Thanks, Mom." Tammy turned to Jeremy and coaxed him forward. He looked eager. May her family live up to his high expectations.
Chapter 20. Jeremy. Seeing Tammy close to her mom like this made Jeremy yearn for home. He really should visit his ma sometime soon. He probably should have made arrangements today, but he told himself he was busy. More like he wanted to avoid home. While she still had Tammy in her arms, Althea opened her arms to Jeremy, too. He hesitated for one moment, and then barreled close and right next to Tammy's wonderful warmth. After Althea released them, Sheldon, Tammy's dad, came on over and shook hands with Jeremy. Just as Jeremy remembered him from when he was growing up, Sheldon Brown was quiet with kind eyes. He nodded a welcome and said, "Gotten tall since I last saw you." From inside the house came a man's words. "That's 'cause he always ate his bacon and eggs like his mom made." "Shush, Gabe," Tammy said. Tammy's brother stuck his blond head out the door and sized Jeremy up and down. "Just think, Tammy, If you ate our ma's bacon and eggs, you could turn out like Jeremy. Smiling, Tammy shook her head. Jeremy gave them a confused look. It's an inside joke, Tammy said. I love Mom's cooking, but I usually skip out on her bacon and eggs. Althea smiled. I still hold out hope that she'll mend her ways. Don't worry, Mom, Tammy said, kissing her cheek. I still love you even if I don't eat everything you make. Good. Speaking of eating, come in, come in. Althea glanced at the guitar slung over Jeremy's shoulder. And I see you'll bless us with music today. Just if we want to play some songs to relax with later, he said. That would be lovely, Althea assured him. Jeremy stepped into the house, following Tammy's example by taking off his boots, and nodded a greeting at Bram and his wife Stella. Marriage and pregnancy seemed to agree with them. Bram looked relaxed and Stella was just glowing. From the kitchen, Gabe announced, Okay, who wants some bacon and eggs?
Chapter 21. Tammy. Tammy sent a furtive glance Jeremy's direction. He seemed to be fitting in well with the rest of the clan, but she never knew with Gabe around. And even Bram seemed to be in on the scheme of embarrass Tammy to the guest as much as possible. So, Bram said, gesturing toward Jeremy with a fork, is it true that Tammy's helping you write some best-selling songs? Jeremy wiped his lips with a napkin. That's the general idea. I'll take even just being able to write songs again as an offshoot. Bram's brows came together. Now, how could a girl help a guy write a song? Gabe waggled his eyebrows. Tammy inspires him, Bram, that's how. Tammy pointed at the plate of bacon and eggs. Anyone want more? Gabe snorted. Nice deflect, Tammy. Though, Mom, in all seriousness, were you planning on a visiting army today? Son, Dad said, you gotta be grateful for your mom's cooking. I am, Gabe said, taking a big bite out of a piece of bacon. I'm just joking. What I don't understand, Tammy said, is how anyone in Congress takes you seriously. Don't worry, Gabe said. No one does. Most everyone is a stuffed shirt and so wrapped up in their own concerns, I'm like the boy left by the adults in the corner with the remote control, driving my little car all over the place. Jeremy blinked. Uh-huh. Well, figuratively speaking, of course. Gabe washed down his food with OJ. Everyone's so serious. Washington, D.C. desperately needs more fun congressmen. You ever think of running, Jeremy? Very funny, Gabe, Tammy said. Leave our poor visitor alone. It's a good question, Jeremy said, smiling. I've actually been asked to run, believe it or not. I can believe it, Gabe said. People would vote in a celebrity any day, even though they didn't have a lick of experience or common sense. Tammy darted a warning glance at Gabe and his sassy mouth. He was full of himself today. I know, Jeremy winced. I really have no interest whatsoever. I love performing too much to give it up. And that makes all of us so relieved, Gabe said, chewing on a piece of bacon. That's less competition. It would kill me to have to campaign against you. Tammy made a slicing motion with her hand on her neck. Oh, I love charades. I know this, Gabe said. Murder. You want to murder me. I meant kill the jokes, Tammy deadpanned. But yes, if you keep going, I might be tempted to do you in. Does that constitute threatening a member of Congress? Gabe wondered aloud. That might be a felony offense. If not, it should be. He turned to Jeremy. Do you like gals in orange get-ups? Got a tie to match?
Chapter 22. Jeremy. Your brother's a riot, Jeremy said when they finally were able to finish breakfast without too many gaffes and head on to church. He drove slowly on the dirt road. Beside him, Tammy sat relaxed, unself-conscious and seemingly unaware of how her beauty was affecting him. Yep, that about sums him up, Tammy said, rolling her eyes. Jeremy had offered to take anyone else with him and Tammy to church, but no one took him up on it. Tammy was his sole passenger, and secretly he was glad. Though for the record, he sure liked the Brown family. Even that goofball Gabe, who, despite his constant joking, did seem brighter than most people. He always had a ready wit and comeback, but could also talk about pretty much any political issue under the sun. Jeremy flicked a glance at her. You and Gabe seem so alike. She scrunched her nose. I'm sorry? I mean, you're both funny. Problem with Gabe is he can be naughty too, always poking fun at someone. I bet you tease as good as the rest of them. She gave him a coy smile. Maybe. Want to know something? He asked. What? She watched him with curiosity. I grew up wishing I could be Bram and Gabe's brother. Really? Tammy giggled. Feel free to trade me spots. Jeremy rubbed his nape. I just really like your parents, especially your mom, and you and your brothers were always so much fun in high school. They sat there in silence for a minute. He knew they should go in, but it felt good to just have a quiet conversation with Tammy without her family and the congregation. Her smile faded. Our lives haven't always been perfect. You know that, right? Well, of course, I mean, with your hard beginnings and all. He faltered. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to suggest. He blushed as his words petered out. It's okay, Tammy assured him. Everyone knows the three of us are adopted. We've never hidden it. Jeremy gave her an admiring glance. I think what makes your family even more amazing is the fact that you're adopted and yet you mesh together so well. It's because we know we have each other's back, she said softly. We're a team. Everyone's got different talents and we pull together. Unlike his family, he thought of his brother wreaking havoc on the already fragile family dynamics. I don't know what that's like, he admitted. In the next several minutes, he unburdened himself to another human for the first time, telling Tammy about his dysfunctional family life. At the end, Tammy reached over to touch his cheek. Sorry. Thanks. He studied the dusting of freckles on her nose and cheeks, her soft, sympathetic expression, and felt an overwhelming urge to kiss her. He glanced at her lips, rosy with gloss, parted in invitation. He leaned forward just as she pulled back. She gave him a panicked glance. Jeremy, we mustn't. I'm sorry, he said, blinking in a daze. There's better times and places than in the parking lot of a church. She smiled and nodded at a couple walking past her. He chewed on that for a long moment. Did she mean he could kiss her under other, more private circumstances? But there wasn't time to clarify. It was time to go to church.
Chapter 23. Tammy. After finally getting done visiting with nearly all of Sunnyridge, wanting to shake hands with the local cowboy who made it big, they finally got into their seats about halfway down the pews. Tammy still felt all unsettled by that almost kiss. If they hadn't been in a church lot, maybe she would have let him. She shook her head and focused on the service. Tammy recited the answers to the responsive reading, and then fished out a notebook from her purse. Within minutes, she'd scribbled some lines in it. She should be paying attention to Pastor Derek, who was wildly swinging a fist like his former days as a pro baseball athlete. But the words were pouring out of her onto the page. This was just a poem, nothing to write home about. But it was sure fun. Sleeping in today to no alarm, trudging out to feed the funny farm, shuffling out to Mom's bacon and eggs. No thanks, I'll have some cereal and figs. Checking the funnies, I snort up juice. Frankly, I don't want to read the news. Get ready for church, primping a curl. Look how my new skirt tilts in a whirl. Beside her, Jeremy shifted his leg and bumped hers. She tried to school her expression, even though she felt like she was the cowgirl jumping over the moon. Happy to sit beside him. Walking to church late, squeeze in a pew. Next to Jeremy, it's hot here. Whew. His arm and leg zing me, next to mine. Oh heavens, is this a test or sign? The sermon flies over my dazed head. I pray for sweet repentance instead. Tammy closed her notebook and slipped it back into her purse. Jeremy slid his hand on his pant leg until it rested against her skirt. She could feel the warmth of his touch through the fabric, and it was majorly distracting. Oh boy, he was tempting her sorely. She glanced at her family. They watched Pastor Derek with rapt attention. Tammy set her hand down on her skirt to pull it away from him. In the process, the side of her hand touched Jeremy's. A warmth flooded her skin and her senses when Jeremy covered her hand with his. Holy moly. She glanced at him, and his gaze met hers. Tammy knew she should smile or something, but she was in a daze and could only avert her eyes. Pastor Derek was winding down his sermon, and all she could think of was his hand on hers. Tammy closed her eyes and opened them again. It was time for the congregation to sing a hymn. Without breaking his hold of her hand, Jeremy grabbed a book and nudged it open on their laps. As the singing began, she wasn't only mesmerized by his hand holding hers, but his voice. Many around them turned around to admire Jeremy's singing. He kept his hand on hers the rest of the service. If she wanted to scratch an itch, she did it with the other hand, her breath coming in shallow over all the excitement. Tammy was sure it was the most distracted she'd ever been in a church meeting. When it was all done, he relinquished hold of her, wincing as though he didn't want to. Instead, he put a hand on the small of her back as they said goodbye to the rest of the congregation mingling at the church stoop. "Would you two like to join us for Sunday dinner?" Mom asked Tammy while darting a glance at Jeremy. Tammy deferred to him. "Up to you." "I would love to, Althea," he said. "You'll get a 2-for-1, Gabe promised. "Mom's cooking and my corny jokes." Dinner was as rowdy or even more so than breakfast. There weren't too many cringeworthy moments, thankfully. For once, Gabe's stories weren't aimed at embarrassing Tammy, but rather poking fun at his colleagues in Congress. Tammy had to admit that she even felt proud of her younger brother making it in the world. Once the dishes were cleared, Jeremy asked if anyone else wanted to sing and play guitar on the porch. "I play an instrument," Gabe said. "The kazoo. And even then, it's horrible," Tammy said. Jeremy smiled. "Surely, he's not that bad." "Oh no, I am," Gabe deadpanned. In the end, only Jeremy brought out an instrument. Everyone else sang hymns or folk songs. Jeremy led a stirring rendition of Amazing Grace. Tammy opened her little notebook and finished her poem from earlier that day while Jeremy continued to play the hymn. Mom invites him to dinner at home, trying, it seems, to matchmake us some. My brothers give me these teasing looks. Over a meal, that's one for the books. We laze on the porch, the group and I. I have eyes, only for one, I'll not lie. He strums a guitar and sings hymn praise. His music never fails to amaze. He stands on the steps saying goodbye. After we drive off, I pray and sigh. Please, I would love him, not just today, but through the week and each holiday. My chest warms from an answer above. Patience, my child, and you'll soon find love.
Chapter 24. Jeremy. On the last day of their songwriting retreat, Jeremy marveled how a week had flown by so fast. The past 2 days, he and Tammy had checked off more of their Sunnyridge list and written poetry or songs. Kat was so impressed with some of the lyrics, she asked Tammy if she could join in with some vocals. Tammy agreed, and they made some fine music. Things seemed to thaw between the two ladies. If only Jeremy could say the same for Sue. That evening, as Jeremy sat on a deck chair waiting for their Dutch oven dinner to cook, he wondered what would happen to him and Tammy after this. Since they held hands at church, there hadn't been an opportunity to be with her in private. Sometimes he wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing, as she'd gone back to keeping some distance between them. But tonight, he felt like he had nothing to lose. He would ask her out. When Tammy came down for dinner, he asked her, Want to go dancing tonight?" She gaped at him. "Dancing?" "Yes." He darted a quick glance to the door, hoping Kat or Sue wouldn't make an appearance and interrupt their conversation. "Just you and me." "I don't know." She fiddled nervously with her hair. "I feel like it's setting us up for disappointment after this. This isn't real life, Jeremy." She looked away. "I've actually thought about life after the retreat," he said softly, "and I would like very much to keep seeing you, to keep co-writing songs. There are no guarantees in life, but you can bet that I will make time and space for you in my life." She smiled wryly. "Like an appointment?" "No, absolutely not." He searched her eyes. "Do you really think I'd do that to you? This week has been wonderful. I'm not the only one who thinks that, yes?" Her eyes flicked up to his, and he could see how torn she was. "You're not the only one." "So say yes, please," he urged. "We might not have a chance to do this again. Sue has a meeting, and Kat, I don't know what she's doing. And sorry, but I don't really care. All I care about is you." "But you said you wouldn't be courting me," Tammy said, sounding exasperated. "Why does that bother you so much if I do? I really want to understand why." She didn't answer right away. When she did, tears glistened in her eyes. "Maybe I want to protect myself, okay? Like I said, this retreat isn't real life, Jeremy. You have your singing career. Sue's your manager. Do you really see her supporting you and me being together?" She shook her head. "It's too much for little old me. I don't think I can handle that kind of pressure." His heart just broke, but he could understand her concerns. "And maybe I want to just let loose for one night and not worry about all that." Tammy winced. "You remind me of when we were younger, when Gabe pestered my parents until they gave in." "That guy is onto something," Jeremy smiled back. "Why dancing of all things?" she asked. He shrugged. "I'm just in the mood, you know? And usually dancing can be done better with a partner." She giggled. "Does that mean yes?" he asked. "Yes." "Really?" He felt like a kid let loose at a toy store. I mean, he cleared his throat. "Great." He was sure his smile was goofy, but he didn't care. "Really?" After she left him to get ready, Jeremy wandered over to a deck chair where he stretched out his fingers to limber them up. He inhaled the crisp autumn air, admiring the changing colors of the landscape. Within a few minutes, he was scribbling another poem. Being with Tammy had set his creativity free. How to explain their dancing date to the others took a bit of doing. "But I'd love to dance," Kat said when she found out what they were doing. "That may be," Jeremy said, "but I've already made plans with Tammy." "What about the press?" Sue asked. "Don't you think they'll ask questions?" "It'll be dark," Jeremy said. "I'm sure no one will recognize me." Sue pursed her lips but said nothing. The way she shot a look at Tammy made Jeremy think of Tammy's comment earlier. He wouldn't want to lose Sue. She'd been a great manager to him, and she'd guided his career to unimaginable heights. But if he had to choose between his agent and Tammy, there was no contest. Chapter 25. Jeremy. Jeremy stood in the commons and turned as soon as he heard footsteps on the stairs. He took in Tammy's white bohemian-style dress and her matching cowgirl boots, her hair done up in beautiful loose curls. After a moment of staring at Tammy, he picked up his jaw from the floor. When he finally learned how to breathe again, he tried for brilliance. "Hello," he said. He would have settled for coherence. She paused, smiling down at him, and then walking slowly step by step to join him, prolonging his sweet agony. "You look amazing." She blushed. "Thanks. Fortunately, I packed this dress at Mom's urging." She said, "You never know," though I didn't believe her at all at that time. "You don't look too shabby yourself." He gestured to his jeans and button-up polo shirt. "This you call usual outfit." She bit her lip. "Well, I hope I'm not overdressed." "Not at all. I just might have to fight off guys tonight." "Cute. I'm sure there will be girls lined up just to win a smile from you tonight." "Too bad," he said. "I'm smiling only at you." They walked out to the cool night. He helped her put on a shawl, his fingers lingering on her skin before stepping back. He caught a whiff of her perfume, his chest aching with the desire to hold her. A smile hovered over her lips. He helped her into the passenger seat and got in the truck. In the close quarters of the cab, the rest of the world fell away. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel as country music played softly in the background. She sat relaxed beside him, just a touch away. A touch he had to resist, he knew. Even if she just let him sit beside her tonight, it was enough for him. "Here we are," he said, coming to a stop in a dirt lot outside a small building. A few couples were making their way to the entrance of the dance hall. Some of them looked over and recognized him. They stared and immediately broke into chatter. "Jeremy Hawke?" the bouncer said. "Yep," Jeremy said, tipping his hat at him. "The lady gets in free." He looked at Jeremy. "And your entrance, sir, is on the house." "That's okay," Jeremy said. "I'll pay like everyone else." "Okie dokie, thanks. Oh, and do you mind signing my hat?" Jeremy escorted Tammy through the crowd, surprising for a Wednesday night. People turned to watch them, and he could sense Tammy turning slightly toward him as though for assurance. He touched the small of her back, and she melted toward him. He had never felt so protective of a girl as he did at that moment, or as anxious to please her. "Is this okay?" he asked Tammy as they came upon an empty table 2 rows from the dance floor. "Uh-huh, sure." They had barely sat when a fast song came on and her head swiveled, quick as a whip. Her eyes flashed and she grinned. "Want to dance?" he asked. She had already jumped off her stool and was snapping her fingers to the beat and leading him to the floor. Jeremy had 2 left feet, but somehow he followed her lead. Left, right, sashay, dip, shuffle, turn. At the end of the song, they were laughing together, breathless. A couple more good Western swing ones had him gasping for air. "You're a great dancer," he said. "You'd make any girl look good," she said. "You don't need my help in that department." He swung her around one more time before the band settled into a ballad, one of his own hits. "This is kind of embarrassing," he murmured as he pulled her close. "You should sing it to me," she said. "Like this?" And he sang the song to her softly. With her eyes closed and her profile turned to him, she was perfection. The lights had dimmed on the floor and his song, "How Do You Know, Pops?" segued into the sweet refrain. He had written this eons ago, before she'd firmly made her way into his radar, but he wondered now if she was the woman he had been waiting for. How did you know to keep dating her? Talking for hours felt like minutes. How did you know what you had was love? Spending time together felt natural as breathing. How did you know that she was the one? Kissing her felt like coming home. He'd kissed Tammy once. It seemed like so long ago. There hadn't been another chance with Sue and Kat around. Would she mind if he... Someone pushed him from behind, bringing him closer to Tammy. They stopped dancing, their gaze dropping to each other's lips. A yearning that had built up within clamored to be filled. The lights were dim, his song revving up into the last verse. Jeremy dipped his head closer. When she didn't pull away, he closed the gap even more until his lips brushed hers. They were sweet like honey. He was greedy, and he wanted more. She got up on her tippy toes, and he was a goner. He kissed her, little brushes that electrified his body. They stopped dancing, and instead their kiss took over. This was the woman he wanted to have in his life. He wanted to kiss her from sunrise to sundown. When applause broke out, the two pulled away. Jeremy was disoriented, wondering if people were clapping for their kiss, but it was just the end of his song. The lights went up, revealing her beautiful, flushed face. and a mob of paparazzi holding up their cameras to capture their private moment.
Chapter 26. Tammy. Hey, just a moment, Tammy. Jeremy's hands hugged on hers at the front porch. Tammy hugged herself, wincing inwardly with pain. Tonight had started out a dream, then descended into a nightmare. At the start, with how Jeremy gazed at her coming down the stairs in her dress, to their dancing, to that kiss, and a few other stolen ones, Tammy wanted to pinch herself. But then it had to end on that broken note, reminding Tammy that dating a celebrity like Jeremy came at a price. Even though the ending confirmed her greatest fear, she did appreciate his sweet gestures. Now they were just steps to the cabin door, before everyone else would once again intrude upon their world. A world that was built on a fantasy. The reality was she would never fit into his world. She turned to him, an apology shone in his eyes as he held her hand. "I'm so sorry about all that." Taking a deep breath and releasing it slowly, she said, "It's okay. I promise that the next time I will protect you." "How?" she challenged with a sad smile. "Are you going to build a wall around us?" When he didn't answer, she turned to walk to the cabin. "Please, Tammy Jo Brown," he said. "Won't you give us a chance?" "I have," she said in a low, pained voice. "I have, all these years." He stared at her. "What?" She looked down at her feet, then at him. "I'd been waiting and hoping you'd notice me all those years, and then you went away to Nashville." "Seriously?" He blinked, his expression filled with wonder and happiness. "Truth is, I wanted to date you in college, but you were slippery as an eel at those poetry readings. I admit I got busy, but when I'd see you around, you didn't seem so interested. A country superstar is also afraid of rejection, I guess." He cocked his head. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Oh, you mean just fess up I had a crush on you?" She winced. "You make it sound so easy." "It can be," he murmured. Before she knew what was happening, his mouth captured hers softly, and then firmly, as though he had every right. Truth was, he did. She could fight all she wanted against his stardom and every fear she had about it, but she couldn't fight against this. Not this searing, all-powerful emotion that had matured into something even deeper. It was madness. It was magic. It had no rhyme nor reason, yet it was everything that made sense. Later, she would think about it, but at this moment, she would simply give herself over to him. Her arms circled his neck, and he groaned, deepening their kiss and sending her mind into a jumble. He was her favorite pasture in the spring, when its beauty made her suck her breath in and stay there forever. In the summer, he was the bounty of crops, with that sweet smell of hay and promise. And in the fall, he was the richness of colors and that cozy warmth from harvest. "I love you," he said, when they came apart to catch their breath. She touched his jaw, her fingers reveling in the feel of his stubble against the pad of her fingers. She could no longer deny her feelings. "I love you too." If she thought his kiss couldn't get any better, she was wrong. An eternity later, but which was more of an hour of saying goodnight, Jeremy released her so she could go into the cabin. All the lights were on, dazzling Tammy's eyes. Jeremy followed her inside and tried to pull her into one last kiss. "No," she said, "the others will hear." "Let them." She shook her head. "You said I could think about it." His expression turned wistful. "Okay, go on to bed," she said. "I need a drink of water." He stole one last kiss, whispered goodnight, then turned a couple of times down the hall before he disappeared into his room. She was still smiling when she turned the corner into the kitchen, stifling a scream. Sue was sitting there nonchalantly, nursing a cup of coffee. Chapter 27. Tammy. Poem by Tammy. Sue Bitter, manager Pitbull, does not like Tammy Brown. For star client Jeremy, and barks, stay away. You scared me to death, Tammy accused Sue. If Gabe were around, she'd have said Sue was like one of those off-kilter villains in stalker movies. Sue raised an eyebrow. Had a grand time? Yes, Tammy answered tersely. She avoided Sue's eyes as she made her way to the cupboard for a glass and then made a beeline to the fridge. She guzzled a drink and then another, downing it quickly so she could go upstairs already. I was at a meeting with Kat tonight, Sue said. Tammy watched her, curious why she was bringing this up. With Kat's manager and agent, Sue continued. They made Jeremy an offer, and I'm supposed to tell him about it. Tammy waited, her patience wearing thin. Could Sue just get on with it? I passed on some of his preliminary work from this retreat, Sue said. They'll sign Jeremy to their label and give him a multi-million contract, if he will do a duet album with Kat. She paused, then went on. There's a catch. They want him to not date anyone else for a year while they work on the album. Fans would hate that. It would shatter their fantasy. Tammy was shaking so hard she was angry. Have y'all noticed that he's a grown man you're talking about, not little Timmy you could boss around? Oh, sure, Sue said. I know he's his own man. He let me know even before this meeting that he's not interested. Tammy frowned. Then why did you go to this meeting anyway? Sue set her cup down on the table. That was Jeremy deciding out of pure emotion. I had an inkling they were going to make this a condition for his contract, and I told him so. He said he couldn't stop me from going, but to not make any promises. And I didn't. Tammy felt a surge of relief, but the glint in Sue's eyes unsettled her. Sue pinned her with her glance. It will be up to you to see if Jeremy's career keeps its successful arc or not. Tammy set her glass down on the counter, her fingers icy. What are you talking about? This may be the only time that Jeremy will ever have a contract offer like this. And it's just for a year. Just lie low for now, and then reappear later. Couldn't you wait? Tammy clenched her jaw. For good or bad, Sue was a shrewd woman. You want the best for him, don't you? Sue prodded. If she'd had an opportunity like this contract, would Jeremy keep her from it? Wouldn't he want what was best for her? What was best for Jeremy? An image appeared in Tammy's mind. Jeremy, riding off into the sunset, with her having enjoyed a good, decent career. Or he could get this multi-million contract and enter the celebrity stratosphere. There hadn't been any talk about having to fake a relationship with Kat, but he might as well do it. Kat was obnoxious, but she'd be so good for his rep. Unlike Tammy was just a normal gal. Don't worry, Sue said. I'll pay you for your trouble. She handed Tammy a stack of money. I don't want it, Tammy said. This includes the songwriting fee that Jeremy earmarked for you. Tammy shook her head. Thanks, but no thanks. Don't be silly, Sue said. You deserve this payment. If nothing else, you helped unblock Jeremy so he's writing great songs once again. Sadness filled Tammy's heart, and she remained silent. Sue took the bills out of the rubber band and counted some out. Here. How about the fee and a bit for a tip? Tammy swallowed her pride and accepted them. The money felt like a bribe, and she felt dirty for accepting it. A rare smile spread on Sue's face. You'll be okay, hon. Everyone falls in love with Jeremy. You don't think you're the only girl he's ever wined and dined, do you? Tammy couldn't believe it. You don't have to tell him goodbye, Sue assured her. It'll be awkward, don't you think? I'll pass word along that you decided to move on. Decided to move on? Tammy echoed. Sue took a sip of her coffee. Sure, you realized you could write songs for other artists. He won't believe that. He won't? Sue raised an eyebrow. But he would believe it if I told you to give him an answer. Okay. Sue drew out the word. Tammy felt like she was standing at a fork in the road. Should she let Jeremy go or not? Should she allow herself to be vulnerable, just as she was gaining independence by graduating from college? Did she love Jeremy enough to give him this opportunity that may never come again in his lifetime? If they end up together, wouldn't he end up resenting her for getting in the way of the next level he wanted? No cats for publicity? Or maybe there would be. Well, Sue asked. Tammy bristled at her impatience, but it was time to make a decision. Tell him I decided I couldn't push through with it, Tammy said. Will he understand what that means? Sue asked. Tammy nodded. He'd better. Sue studied her. Why did you agree to this? Because I love him. Because I don't love myself enough. Because I want what's best for him, she said simply. Sue set down her cup carefully on the saucer. Fair enough. Tammy staggered out of the kitchen and up the stairs. At the landing, she leaned over the rail for a moment, hoping against hope that Jeremy might appear from out of nowhere and save her from herself. But he didn't. Walking the remainder of the way to her bedroom, she allowed herself a couple of tears before brushing them away and packing.
Chapter 28. Jeremy. Poem by Jeremy. What if I see Tammy today? I might turn a fool with what I say. What if she smiles warmly at me? I can melt like asphalt on Highway 3. What if she sends a heated glance? I would steal a kiss if given a chance. Jeremy woke with a smile on his face, and he immediately remembered. Tammy. Her name rolled off his tongue like poetry. He lay there indulging a daydream from last night. By the end of the memory of her kisses, he was anxious to be with her once again. He would steal a kiss from her in the kitchen, regardless of who else was there. He showered and dressed in record time. Where should he take her today, now that the retreat was officially over and they could just be in a relationship? They could hike through the trees. The leaf color would be at the height of fall. Or they could go to the pumpkin patch and carve jack-o'-lanterns. They could rake leaves in her yard and jump on them. His grin widened. Downstairs he encountered Sue with her coffee. His eyes panned the rest of the kitchen. No Tammy. He could go bring her breakfast. The thought was delicious. Good morning, Sue greeted him. Good morning. He walked over to the toaster and put in a couple slices of bread. Have you seen Tammy? He tried to sound casual. She's gone. His hand froze in the act of pushing down the toaster button. His head whipped round. What? She left last night. Jeremy blinked, trying to make sense of Sue's words. Did she have some emergency or something? Is it her mom or... No, Sue said. She said she had been thinking of things and to tell you she couldn't do it. She said you would know what she meant. The toast popped up behind him, but Jeremy didn't care about that now. She said that? Sue nodded. She also said you would understand. Jeremy's mind returned to the evening before. He'd asked Tammy to think about their relationship and future together. Her answer was no. Sue bid her, so help me if you're lying. I'm not, I swear. We both know I wasn't a big fan of you and her being together, but in this case she chose to leave. I'm not making up what she said. Numb, Jeremy turned to the toaster and took out the bread. It was burnt at the edges. He no longer had any appetite. He gazed listlessly at the empty chairs, the window, the cute white cupboards in the kitchen. Nothing made sense to him right at the moment. Not Tammy leaving. I gave her the rest of the money you owed her, Sue said. So now Jeremy had no excuse to talk to her again, to see her. The crack in his heart hurt too much. He needed to get away somewhere, to punch a wall or something. He needed to... A footfall arrested his movement. He turned hopeful eyes toward the kitchen doorway. Maybe she had changed her mind and had come back for him after all. Do you guys ever sleep? Kat said, shielding her eyes from the sun through the back door. Kat asked him another question, but he just staggered past. He strode down the hall, aiming for his bedroom. He got in and closed the door. He sat on the bed and sank his head into his hands. Had Tammy ever loved him? Was she just in this for the money? Why did she leave without telling him goodbye? Had she not loved him after all?
Chapter 29. Tammy. 2 months later. Tammy showed her press pass at the football stadium. The security guard looked at her photo and then the real deal and waved her through. Free concert admission was one of the perks of being a staff reporter for the Colorado Springs paper. Shortly after her songwriting job, she landed this position. She came to the first concert poster on the wall and stared. That wasn't too bad by itself, but by the time she'd come to the third one, her chest was aching with longing. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, she pressed her fingers against Jeremy's face on the poster. He smiled, but there was a sad quality to it, like he had just had his heart broken. Dream on, Tammy. More importantly, move on, Tammy. She pulled back her hand and walked on. It was foolhardy to think that she could cover Jeremy's concert with any degree of objectivity, but she was the only one on staff who was free that night. Plus, who was she kidding? Covering this was a ton more interesting than the community beat. Tammy made her way to the front row and asked the usher for the press seating. This entry-level job that would probably not last her forever had its perks. He waved her to the first row. Go on. Enjoy. Tammy sat on the aisle seat closest to the exit in case she needed to escape. She was fine right now, but maybe, if she were to see him again, she would fall apart. She hardened her heart. She was no weakling. Even Mom, an incurable romantic, said someone else was slated for her, and to trust God. The lights dimmed once, twice. Like the rest of the audience, Tammy got on her feet, clapping. It wouldn't do to act oddly and out of place. Heaven forbid Jeremy would notice her in the crowd. No chance of that. As soon as the lights in the stadium dimmed and blanketed the audience in darkness, the stage lights came on. Jeremy burst onto stage to frenzied screaming, a guitar slung around his neck, ready to make music. And what an opener he did. This is a bit of country and city, he said in that voice that continued to haunt her in her dreams. A bit of sass and sweet. He and the band riffed on a powerful opening and launched into a rousing number. Jeremy swayed and danced while strumming on the guitar, his biceps straining his shirt sleeves. Off stage, he was handsome. On stage, he was the ultimate performer. The audience, especially the girls on the front row, ate it all up. They stood and tried to approach the front of the stage, while event security kept an arm's length between them and their idol. What if she stood like them and screamed her head off, catching his eye? Nope, not today, not ever. She had a chance once, and it had passed, and he was thriving beautifully, thank you. The last thing she needed to do was to show up in his world and pretend like she somehow fit. Tears stung her eyes, and she rummaged through her bag for a tissue. As she pulled one out, a piece of paper fluttered to the floor. She picked it up and unfolded it, remembering how she'd scribbled this poem one of those late, insomniac nights after she walked away from Jeremy. The cowboy sights his love tonight and braves the crowd to say hello. He feels the urge for fight or flight, but stamps it down to let her know he's yearned for her since that night. The cowgirl hates to break his heart, but break she must for lofty dreams to help him reach the top of the chart. She says, contrary to what it seems, we're really, truly better off apart. The vixen preens as she walks in and zones in on him from afar. Hiya, cowboy, handsome as sin, and sits beside the country star. He mumbles as though drunk on gin. The manager sees all this unfold, pats the cowgirl on the back. The cowboy, she won't need to scold. The vixen needn't give her no flack. Thank goodness, truth be told. Chapter 30. Tammy. The rocking beats continued for 3 numbers, brash songs that, despite the upbeat sound, seemed laced with anger. Tammy wondered if she was just imagining that sharp mood, but she caught it in the intensity of his gaze as he looked over the audience and sang. The last note of the song died down to wild cheering and applause, not lessening for a good minute. Jeremy wandered over to a simple stool front center of the stage and sat down, cradling the guitar. I took a poetry class once, he said, where I learned terse verse. It makes for great concert joke openers. Here's one. What do you call a grumpy ranch hand? Rude dude. The audience groaned. What do you call a derby runner-up? Worse horse. A bit more laughter this time. What do you call an old saddle? Beat seat. The audience tolerated his corny jokes. He strummed his guitar. Don't worry, I'll keep my day job. Some of you might know I come from a town called Sunnyridge. He shielded his eyes. Good for the 2 of you in the audience. The audience laughed, then he continued. It's a nice place if you like quiet and that sort of thing. I used to like it a lot, too. Until a girl broke my heart. Tammy's heart thudded. She was sure people were staring and pointing at her, but of course they didn't do such a thing. I actually wrote a song about a special time she and I had a while back, if 2 months is a while back. His eyes exuded sadness, but I wasn't ready to sing it then. Today's the first time I'm going to. I hope you enjoy it. It's called At the Dance Hall. The front row stood up, ready with their cell phone lights. Tammy stayed in her seat, frozen, watching Jeremy strum the opening lick of his ballad, trying to will her heart to stay strong. His glimmering stare, pungent haze of smoke, sultry warm dance hall, loud drone of voices, tangy sip of punch as he crosses the room. Opening riff of song, an answer in her eyes, salty sweat on his lip, alluring whiff of perfume, his strong against her soft as he pulls her close. A slow country waltz, his hands on her waist, scruff on his jaw, musk and spicy soap, minty breath of promise, as she has yearned. Tammy, sitting in the audience, closed her eyes from reliving the ecstasy and pain. The words washed over her like a guilty wave. Could he have been as devastated as his aching voice sounded? Could he have pined for her over this memory? Maybe it was fiction he'd exploited for commercial value. Or maybe, just maybe, it came from his heart. Between verses, there was a little instrumental riff. The spotlight focused on Jeremy, sitting forlorn with his guitar. If he were to be believed, he had taken her rejection pretty hard, and his heart still hadn't healed. Her shining fall of hair, tantalizing floral scent, his heart revving up, her fingertips on his nape, his mouth dry from thirst, as only she can quench. Darkness in the room, intoxicating fragrance, silk rustling against linen, his warm lips brushing hers, exquisite sweet nectar, as the world falls away. When it was over, everyone around Tammy cheered, except for her. She wiped away tears from her cheeks, a mixture of bitter and sweet. When the concert was about over, he played a few more playful songs. One was Two Girls, Two Sunrises, which cracked the audience up, and A Well-Trained Horse. There were shouts of encore, and he returned to the stage to oblige, played one of his older hits, until eventually he truly left the stage. Tammy sat there reeling from his music. She knew deep in her soul that he had sung it all in sincerity. She'd thought she was no longer in love with him, but now, even if she was, there wasn't anything she could do about it. Tammy realized then she had been waiting for something, for Kat Keller to come out from the wings and sing duets with him. Maybe they just hadn't wrapped up their project yet. Feeling old compared to all the teen girls who had occupied most of the front row, Tammy stood. Someone shoved her from behind, and she stumbled into what she realized belatedly was a wave of movement toward the stage steps. A man in a black shirt emerged from the wings. "Everyone here for the meet and greet with Jeremy Hawke. Come this way." There was screaming and shoving, and Tammy was swept up to this meet and greet line, even though she knew better than to gate crash. But no one was letting her squirm out. She endured the crowd until they entered a side entrance where security people milled about. It was an unexciting area, with stark white walls and poor acoustics. About 50 fans, excited chatter bounced off the walls, giving Tammy a headache. Sue appeared, bringing horrible memories to the surface for Tammy. She wanted to flee, but someone had locked the door, and she was forced to endure this to the end. Maybe if she pressed herself in the shadows, no one would notice her as being reluctant to come up for a photo with Jeremy. Sue barked the orders. 1 photo per person. Once done, step to the other side to indicate you got the photo. Tammy chewed the inside of her mouth with worry. She would have to find a way to bypass the line and move over to done without him noticing her. Yes, that's what she would do. Jeremy arrived then, making her forget everything she'd resolved. Chapter 31. Tammy. On the stage, Jeremy had looked happy, but in person, she noted that his cheekbones were more gaunt than before, like he was faking his smile and wishing he could be 1,000 miles away. With a stack of CDs and a marker, he took a seat on a chair behind a little table. Why had she gone to this concert? She asked herself this question for the nth time, until she finally admitted the truth. She had wanted to see for herself that his losing her had left a mark on his soul. Well, it was evident it had, as losing him had left a mark on hers. She moved on with the line, chewing the inside of her lip and trying to hide her face as best as she could. Jeremy wouldn't notice her anyway, not until she was on top of him and wanting her photo taken. Wouldn't that be a hoot, showing up at his side, his arm around her waist like the old days? Just the thought made her weak at the knees. No way was she going to make a fool of herself, nor of Jeremy. About 5 people away from her spot, Tammy saw an opening in the line. She stepped across the divide and quickly assimilated with the done crowd. "Wait," Jeremy said. "Don't you want your photo taken too?" Tammy paused before turning, looking straight into his eyes. She watched the expression of curiosity turn into shock, and then wonder. "Sorry," Jeremy said, sounding dazed. "I have to ask everyone to leave for a moment." When no one moved, he added, "Now." There were some whispers of discontent from the not done crowd, but with Jeremy's firm command, no one dared question him. "What's wrong?" Sue said, approaching from the corner. Tammy felt a bit of satisfaction seeing the older woman blanch upon seeing her, her mouth forming an O. Tammy moved to leave too, but Jeremy said, "Except for you, Tammy. Please." She turned and he was looking straight at her, cool with his expression, probably filled with loathing. The crowd filled out, some of them outright glaring or staring at Tammy with curiosity. She returned their stare until she was the only one left. Sue crossed her arms over her chest. "Sue, please leave us," Jeremy said. "Stay close for instructions." Sue moved as though to object, her lips forming a pout. But Jeremy stared her down, and she simply nodded and left. Tammy wondered if this underground room used to be some war bunker. It felt as though they were stuck there forever and would never see the light of day. Meanwhile, Jeremy just watched her for a long minute. She refused to squirm under his gaze and raised her chin, staring back at him with defiance. "Hello, Tammy," he said. The way he said her name made her stomach flip. "Hello, Jeremy." "Why did you come?" he asked, his voice cold and uncaring. "I work for the paper now." She touched the press pass suspended from a lanyard around her neck. "I'm covering this concert." He nodded, his expression staying neutral. "So that's the job you ended up getting?" "Yes." "Congratulations," he said, but he sounded anything but happy for her. "It's a job," she said. "I would like a position at a paper with a bigger circulation someday, but they treat me well, and with the small staff, I get to do a lot of things." Why was she blabbing on and on like Jeremy Hawke even cared about that stuff? He had his concerts and fans. Her job was nothing compared to it. But his expression softened and he asked, "What do you write?" "Features mainly, but some news pieces too." "Maybe you could do one on me." "I am. A concert review." "No, I meant an in-depth feature. A heart-to-heart." Her cheeks warmed. She had thought about it at some point, but of course, it was out of the question. "Small-town boy makes it big in country music," she said. "Something like that." He paused as though wrestling with something difficult. "You never said goodbye." His broken heart was visible on his face. Pain twisted his smile. "No, I didn't," she said. "It was for the best." He challenged her with a stare. "Whose best?" "Yours." His impassive mask cracked. "Come on, Tammy. You at least owe me some honesty." Seconds passed as his words reverberated between them. What would it hurt or help now for him to see what it took for her to walk away from the possibility of love? "That night, we got in from dancing," she said. "Sue talked to me." "I knew it," he exploded. "Listen, please." His eyes sparked with fight, but he stayed silent. "She said you'd had an offer to do a CD with Kat and a multi-million-dollar contract." He nodded, his jaw set. "But there was a condition: you couldn't date anyone else during that time." "She said that?" he asked, understanding dawned in his eyes. "Yes," she said. "I decided I would make it easier on you to decide by taking myself out of the picture." "What?" he thundered. "What did Sue tell you?" "That you couldn't." His eyes expressed a world of hurt. "Do you know how many times I dissected that answer? But your silence confirmed that you didn't want anything to do with me." "It wasn't that," Tammy protested. "Then why did you walk away?" "I loved you more than I loved myself, I guess," she said. "Any which way I looked at it, I just couldn't see how I could ever measure up, but—" He stood up so abruptly, his chair clattered backward to the floor. Sue rushed in, her brow furrowed with worry. "It's okay, Sue," Jeremy said, not looking at her. His gaze burned into Tammy, filling her with uncertainty and exhilaration. "I've got it all handled." Tammy stayed rooted to the spot, her heart pounding with anticipation at what Jeremy was going to do. He was walking toward her now, until they were arm's length from each other. It had been 2 months since she last saw him, but all that time separated fell away at his nearness. She wanted to run her fingers over his rugged scruff. His dark eyes studied her, as though trying to memorize every detail of her face. "So," he said in his delicious baritone, "you know what's best for me?" His eyes danced with amusement. Was this a trick question or what? "You think not having you in my life is the best for me," he continued. "You could have any woman in the world, Jeremy," she reminded him. What if I want only a certain woman? His voice was low, husky. A frightening and lovely warmth spread through her chest, making it hard for Tammy to breathe. She lowered her eyes. She'll never measure up to what the world will say, Tammy said. He hooked her chin with his thumb and forefinger and lifted her face so they looked each other eye to eye. She's enough. You're enough. Tears pricked her eyes. Not according to your manager. He made an impatient sound. Sue's wrong. I should never have listened to her in the first place, agreeing to that fakery with Kat. I finally grew a spine, and we turned down that contract. You what? He let her go gently. They couldn't pay me enough to work with Kat. She's talented, don't get me wrong, but I just couldn't imagine several more months of Kat Keller. The label didn't sign me, but it's okay. My indie label is getting a lot of attention. Sue was able to book me on a tour to open with Josiah Thomas. Josiah was one of the biggest names in country. Congratulations, Tammy said, covering her mouth in her excitement. That's fantastic. Jeremy's smile mellowed. Yeah, I should be all happy, right? Things are going well for my career. I'm writing songs. But I guess it's still not enough. He glanced at her with longing. He raised a finger and trailed it along her jaw, sending a tingle up her spine. I wish, he murmured, that I could share it with this girl I could never get out of my mind. Or heart. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. Jeremy, she warned. What, my love? My love. The words bounced around her heart. Tammy said, You can't. You mustn't. Mustn't what? He took a step closer, his even greater nearness making her brain go haywire. Do you have a boyfriend, Tammy? No. Are you dating anyone at all? This was so embarrassing to admit. No. His lips inched toward hers. Have you kissed anyone since I kissed you our last night together? As her lips formed the word no, his mouth brushed against hers. I have to know, though, he said, as he slid a hand under her hair and nape, tilting her face. Are you still in love with me? He stood there with his heart in his eyes, asking in all sincerity. She owed him the truth. I've never stopped loving you. He leaned his forehead against hers. And I haven't stopped loving you, silly girl. The memory of their last night together at the dance hall came back fierce. I don't know if I can handle the pressures of fame, she admitted. We'll handle them together, he assured her. I won't pretend it'll be a cakewalk. It will be hard, and there will be people who will try to wrench us apart if we're not careful. But it will be a wonderful life. I want to spend the rest of mine with you. You mean in marriage? Tammy blurted out with a squeak in her voice. Yep, his eyes shone. That's exactly what I mean. But that's a big decision. What's there to decide exactly? Well, for one, you're on tour, and I've got a job with the paper, and my family will go crazy, and... Wow, she fanned herself. I'm hyperventilating. He chuckled and kissed her nose. One thing at a time, my dear. How about for today? Let's at least agree that we love each other. She smiled. I think I can handle that. Can you handle a kiss? Gosh, I don't know. Her gaze faltered to his lips. It depends on the kiss. His mouth curved into a sexy smile. How about this? Soft nips here and there, hints of a greater promise. She stood in a daze as he inflicted upon her the most delicious torture in the world of kissing her, almost too lightly, and making her want more. Well, he asked, pulling back, a heat in his gaze. I couldn't tell. It wasn't long enough. Can you? This time, he possessed her mouth fully, making her blood sing. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck and clung as wave upon wave of pleasure of his kiss overcame her. Someone's footsteps sounded in the room. Will you need me for anything else tonight, Jeremy? Sue asked. Tammy turned, apprehensive, but Sue's expression was resigned. maybe even slightly warm and approving. "No, thank you, Sue," Jeremy said, his hold around Tammy tightening. "Take the rest of the night off." Sue cocked her head. "I take it you two are together again," Jeremy said. "Yes, and I expect that my staff and those close to me will respect that." "Can I count on you, Sue?" Sue nodded. "Of course. Good. Good to see you again," Sue told Tammy before exiting the room. "Will wonders never cease?" Tammy mused. "First we reunite, then Sue seems okay with me being around? Does she have a choice?" She shook her head. "No, not really." "I will always choose you," Jeremy whispered tenderly, before giving Tammy another kiss.
Epilogue. Jeremy. A year later. Jeremy ran out to the stage carrying his good old guitar by the neck, the energy of the crowd feeding into his. Everyone was standing, stomping, and pumped for a great concert. "Jeremy," they chanted. Just a year ago, he would never have imagined this kind of success. He had gone from opening for Josiah Thomas to headlining his own concerts to bigger crowds, thanks to his muse. Tammy not only inspired his songs, she helped co-write and critique lyrics for him, and now that they were married and had a baby on the way, the creative juices continued to flow. The thought of being a father filled him with a bit of anxiety and a lot of excitement. He opened the lineup with his biggest hit, At the Dance Hall, and launched into some of his faster songs. As he liked to do those days, he asked for the tech crew to shine the spotlight on his wife before asking her to come up and join him on stage. By now everyone knew their love story, thanks to his new CD, Romance in a Small Town. Jeremy and Tammy had told it to media so many times, even giving them a tour of Sunnyridge to show places from their childhood Jeremy liked to sing about. His beautiful wife glowed with happiness, 3 months along and not showing quite yet. His beautiful cowgirl walked to the stage beaming. She clasped his hand, and he knew by how icy cold it was she was still nervous despite having done this several times. He said, "This here is my sweet pea, my honey bunch, my—" "Hun," Tammy interjected. "Come on, they didn't come here for your bad metaphors." Laughter. "You're right," Jeremy said. "They came here to hear me sing to my one and only love. Hey, I penned some new lyrics last night." "Oh?" Tammy gazed at him with trepidation. "Let's hear it." "Gotta give y'all some background to this," Jeremy explained. "I wrote this poem after this gal made me the luckiest cowboy alive, marrying her. Ready?" "Yes," the crowd said. Wedding bells got them together, standing in a field of clover. Inside of a black-white heifer, they lived happily ever after. Tammy blushed and laughed along as thousands of fans guffawed and cheered them on. "Seriously, Mrs. H," Jeremy said as he gazed deep into Tammy's eyes and whispered for her ears alone, "I love you." She leaned close to him, the lights from the crowd reflecting in her eyes. "And I love you too." The end.
This has been A Cowboy's Love Song, Riverdale Ranch Romance, Book Number 3, written by Jewel Allen, narrated by Melissa Connell and Scott Rose. Copyright 2019 by Jewel Allen. Production copyright by Jewel Allen.